This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Naruto accidentally goes to Bleach universe after sealing Kaguya. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no time, let's start the story.
Peace. At the forefront of his mind, that was all he could really think of. Normally covered in battle scars, his body felt unharmed and weightless. His mind, which was typically filled with an unhealthy amount of paranoia and a constant barrage of impulsive emotions, was quiet. His five senses, which were often overworked in order to survive, were unaffected. To be honest, he couldn't recall ever feeling this way. Indeed, he has had special moments in his life, such as receiving his position as a village protector in the form of a headband from someone who genuinely cared about him and his success. Learning what it meant to be truly strong and demonstrating that strength to everyone who questioned his fighting prowess and even his humanity. Gaining the respect of his peers and fellow villagers regardless of the duration or effort required. Having people he could truly call his friends and family, and even being fortunate enough to have a brief encounter with his parents despite his lifelong status as an orphan. His past experiences were all full of or led to moments of unadulterated joy and achievement that he will always cherish. They were some of the most memorable moments in his life that helped shape him into the person his friends, allies, and himself were most proud of. He might not trade those experiences for anything in the world, but he might. Nevertheless, he was unable to relate anything he had experienced to how he was feeling at the moment. Without having to be unconscious for any reason, it was almost as if he was not aware of anything his body had become conditionally accustomed to. He was able to understand the feeling of being in a somewhat deep meditative state with the obvious attentiveness of knowing he wasn't asleep in what little cognitive thought he could muster. If anything, he could liken it to being half asleep, aware of your own ongoing sleep while paying attention to some of the events around you, albeit a little disorganized depending on your own mental state. Yes, this was similar to that, but on an entirely different scale. He didn't want to leave, and it was quiet. It's likely that nothing would have changed if seconds, hours, or even years had passed. He just didn't care and didn't understand the passage of time. To be honest, what exactly was causing him to feel this way? He wasn't sure why, but he sensed that his mind was simply relaxed and that it was due to something else. He felt as though a heavy burden had been abruptly removed from his shoulders, relieving him of all the problems that might have accumulated over the previous few years. It seems as though a sort of decisiveness of the utmost importance simply vanished, freeing him from further concern. He was alive, wasn't he? Was this heaven? If so, what else could it be if it didn't feel like hell? An unending emptiness? Maybe purgatory? Even though he wasn't always the best citizen, he showed his true feelings when it counted, so at least he was relieved to be among the truly evil people, right? If not, well, that's just awful. He found the strength to keep his eyelids slightly open in spite of his inner protest about wanting to escape the calm and easy state of mind he was in. Unsurprisingly, there was initially some blurriness, but after he tried blinking a few times, whatever was in his line of sight became more distinct. In front of his sleepy sapphire eyes, he saw a sea of fiery orange that stretched to every nook and cranny of his peripheral vision. Well, shit. His chances of escaping eternal flames were dwindling by the moment. Oh wait. There were also a few clouds that appeared in sporadic locations. I'm grateful that it was only a sunset, and a lovely one at that. The familiar hues of a fading day brought back memories of all the times he would sit peacefully atop the heads of the Hokages on their individual monuments, watching the remnants of sunlight envelop the village as though it were all enchanted by a mythical and subdued fire. Definitely appropriate for the namesake of their nation. From what he's seen in his initial moments of responsiveness, everything is going well. Oh, and there's a bird. Simply gliding in the breeze and relishing the freedom it was given to enjoy in the open air, it appeared to be having a good time as well. The wind was something it coexisted with and controlled in its own way, and, wait, he was now experiencing the wind as well, intensely so as its jagged gusts raced around his body from beneath him. Hold on, down below. And why, without even turning away from him, was the bird rapidly moving farther and farther away? Oh, he hardly had time to say, son of a, before he felt a tremendous force of impact explode on his back as alarms in his mind loudly responded. He was powerless to stop his body from continuing its path of carnage as the pain rapidly became apparent and his breath was being forced out of his lungs. Nothing was spared as every part of him smashed and broke pieces of whatever he landed on, including his arms, legs, torso, and head. He could tell it was the O.So. Familiar cries of cracking wood from the loud cracks that sounded out. Oh, wasn't that beautiful? From having a mind that drifted peacefully, he suddenly launched himself into a tree and struck what seemed like everything. Oh no, branch. Even in the heat of the moment, he could tell that it had only been a second or two since the impact to clear the last branch. Well, there goes that misperception of time. It didn't really matter to him because he knew that when he got to the base of the branches, there was thud. The earth. Did he hit cement, too? Although it was surprising, why not now? Well, at least he used his head to break the fall. With difficulty, he rasped out, fuck, while lying face down on the filthy, cold cement that served as his makeshift bed. Every part of his body hurt. Every tiny motion he attempted, including moving a finger or two, triggered excruciating pain that made him want to do nothing more. But even with the pain, fatigue, and severely dazed mind that were becoming more noticeable as the seconds passed, he knew he had to figure out what the hell was going on, regardless of what his body wanted to do. He slowly raised his head, one eye barely open, with what appeared to be a lot of effort at the time. To his astonishment, the first thing he noticed were a pair of tiny feet covered in black shoes with buckles. He assumed the owner was a young girl based on the tiny pink flower that covered the end of each buckle. This was confirmed when he looked up a little further and saw the bottom of what appeared to be a casual dress. If he couldn't even tell she was there, he thought, wow, I must be really out of it. Yo. You wouldn't happen to have a bandage or two, would ya? He asked in a low voice, trying to be as humorous as possible. After all, he didn't want to frighten her. He looked like hell, and that would probably scare away any normal kid, if the pain throughout his body and the blood he felt rapidly drip off his chin onto the ground were any indication. In response, he heard a feminine gasp and saw her take a startled step back. What's wrong? He asked himself. She said in a whisper, You can see me. He wasn't exactly prepared for that question, though. He answered, why wouldn't I be able to? Because. A new, distinctly male voice interrupted, what's going on now? First some stupid skateboarders, now the hell. With a slightly more cheerful tone, the girl said, hello again, mister. The stranger said, what's going on? She shrugged and indicated she didn't know herself, pointing down to the battered and bloody man beside her. Footsteps sped across the sidewalk and approached the two. The only thing the prone man could really see was that the person approaching him was wearing gray pants and sneakers. When he stopped in front of him and knelt down, still too high to see above his chest, he remarked, you look like hell. With some difficulty, the injured man responded, feel like it. He used that opportunity to spit out some blood that had accumulated in his mouth. The stranger began lifting him off the ground while keeping an eye on his wounds and asked, think you can stay alive a little longer? The battered man grunted in agony as he was lifted onto the stranger's shoulders and then remarked, got nothing else to do. Of course you don't. Just hold on, I'm taking you to get help. Sounds good. The man's consciousness was rapidly ebbing away. He could see what appeared to be a book bag dangling on his side from his new perch on his assistant's shoulder, and he also saw that he was wearing a gray shirt. He looked up to see the stranger jogging away from what he now recognized as an alley. Additionally, he noticed that the tree across a short wall was severely damaged from his fall from the sky. He was unsure of how to interpret the young girl's appearance when he caught a glimpse of her beauty just before his current transport turned the corner. With her dress and pigtails of brown hair, she appeared like any other typical girl. The fact that the left side of her head was completely covered in blood, which appeared to flow down and obscure her left eye, caught him off guard. The chain dangling idly from the center of her chest, however, was the stranger. These things, along with her innocent smile and farewell wave, were simply too much for him to process. What? Before he eventually blacked out, the girl abruptly moved through the wall beside her, leaving him with one final thought. The streets of Karakura town, a young woman with long, burned orange hair asked, is that Kurosaki-kun? As she watched someone she believed to be a classmate sprint down the sidewalk. The bloodied blonde man he was carrying on his shoulder attracted the attention of many onlookers, but his desperate running would have been sufficient to attract attention. The girl's companion, who had short black and spiky hair, said with a worried expression, looks like it. Seems like he's taking that guy to his family's clinic. I hope he makes it okay, he looks really messed up. With the same worry concealed, the orange-haired girl said, what do you think happened, Tatsuki-chan? Tatsuki looked at her closest companion. As she began to make her way back to her house, she said, no clue. I didn't hear a car crash or anything, so maybe a fight? We can ask Ichigo tomorrow. Come on, Orihime, my mom's probably getting worried from how long we're taking. Orihime nodded and followed her friend's pace, giving Ichigo one last glance before he vanished from view. She made a mental wish for the hurt stranger, I hope you'll be okay. Kurosaki residence at night. Ichigo whispered, hang on, we're almost there, to his unconscious passenger. Now that he was getting close to his home family clinic, he went straight for the front door of the house, which ought to have been left unlocked, avoiding the locked medical building. He hurriedly twisted the doorknob to enter and had to dodge a flying kick that was headed straight for his head. Ichigo yelled, "What the hell's your problem?" as his attacker flew through the open door. A man's voice called out, "You're late," as the owner returned inside. Looking at the person his son was carrying, the black-haired man who had been revealed said, "And you know damn well dinner is always at, huh?" "Exactly, first I had to help a spirit and now I'm dealing with this guy, help me out, will ya?" Ichigo exclaimed. The serious man who oversaw the clinic had taken the place of the hyperactive father. He gave his son an order, nodding fiercely, before the head of the household turned and yelled toward the kitchen, where his two wide-eyed daughters were seated. His son nodded and rushed down the hallway. "Get him onto a medical bed, I'll get things ready. Karen, Yuzu, put dinner on hold. Someone needs help." It was all over. They had at last had the opportunity to put an end to this hell for everyone, not just themselves. To get here, a great deal of blood, perspiration, and tears had to be shed. They could have failed long ago if they had put in even a little less effort along this arduous and exhausting path. This ultimate triumph required every action and sacrifice. And he felt a great sense of relief after they used that last method. Shibaku Tensei. That was all. That's all it ought to have been. But for him, things were never easy. Perhaps it was her last attempt to achieve a last-ditch win. Perhaps they didn't execute the technique correctly. Perhaps an unidentified external factor got in the way. Perhaps one last sacrifice was all that was required. Or perhaps bad things just happen. What's happening? It's deteriorating too fast. A bunch are opening up. Hurry and get them. Kurama, he's caught. No. Naruto. Naru. Kurosaki Clinic at night. A jolt of pain shot through Naruto's torso, causing his eyes to open wide with a gasp as he lurched forward, something he immediately regretted. He let out a little grunt of discomfort and waited for the pain to go away until he had calmed down enough to assess the situation. The blurriness in his blue eyes cleared after a few blinks, and the first thing he saw were the medical supplies, including syringes and rolls of gauze, which he had dreaded seeing each time he had to be in a hospital. He was in a hospital, drat. The second was that, although they were not drawn at the moment, the curtains on either side of his bed typically provided several patients in the same room with some degree of privacy. This allowed him a clear view of the remainder of the room. It was packed with various devices, whether he was aware of them or not, and appeared to be able to manage several patients at once if necessary. The full moon casting its lunar glow through the window beside his bed was the last thing he immediately noticed. Normally, he could take a moment to admire this lovely scene, but all of a sudden, he was reminded of the pale eyes that he had just fought with everything on the line. He stared blindly at the bright moon and whispered to himself, "What happened? Did we win?" A deep, familiar voice echoed in his head, "Damn right we did." Naruto replied, taking a sharp breath in shock, "Kurama? Who else?" "Shut up." He closed his eyes and let a tiny smile form at the corner of his mouth. "So, we actually won." The fox appeared exhaustedly relieved. "I just said that, didn't I?" "Yeah, we got the bitch, and that damn plant freak Zetsu too." It was also relieved that it was over. With a lighthearted chuckle, Naruto slouched forward and raised a bandaged hand to rest his head on. "After everything we've done, it just seems so hard to believe, just, holy shit. You're not going to cry, are you? Hell no, are you? I'm an ancient mass of sentient chakra, I don't cry. So says the old furball, for now. A furball that can kick your ass, you damn fishcake." Naruto couldn't contain his laughter. He truly missed being able to talk without worrying about getting into a fight. And who was the one that kicked the other's ass to attain control of its chakra? "Shut up." In the silent, dimly lit room, Naruto continued to laugh. After he had calmed down, he returned his focus to the moon and slightly smoothed his facial whiskers. "What happened, Kurama? And where are we? All I remember is doing the sealing process for Kaguya and then it gets all hazy. For the second question, I have no idea, while the first is more complicated." "Shoot then. There's nothing else to do." "Fine. You and the Uchiha were successful with the Chibaku Tensei and sealed away those two, so don't worry about that. After doing that is when it gets complicated. Go on. Both you and the other brat just fell, like you were both completely spent. Then with Kaguya's power cut off, her core dimension started to fall apart, and way too quickly at that." "Wait, if I was out of it, wouldn't that mean you would have been cut off from seeing clearly too?" The fox smirked, and he could almost feel it. "Not my young half. You got both again." "Yes, and that's what happened next. No one really knew what was going on or what to do with everything crumbling down and pathways opening up, but we had to get you both first. Cyclops was already getting duck-ass, so I went to grab you." The moment I came into contact with your body I was, in a word, absorbed. Alright, I get the ceiling, but not the actual reason on why it happened like that. And pathways. What do you mean? I didn't pay much attention since I was hurrying to get you, but with Kaguya's power acting unstable as she was being sealed, more doors were opening all around from what I could see. Like I said, though, my yang was sealed and joined my yin, not sure why, and I only woke up at the same time as you did a moment ago. As Naruto's thoughts became more erratic, his breathing abruptly increased. But what about the others? What about us? Are they okay? Are we stuck wherever we are? What the hell are we going to do? What? Kurama yelled, Naruto, and silenced his partner. Look, I don't know what to tell you. I was taken out of the picture just after you were. It's not hard to believe that maybe we fell into one of those newly opened doorways and got here, wherever it is. It might be hard to grasp, but you have to think clearly. How can you be so calm about this? My friends could be in trouble, I might never see them again. The fox let out a sigh. It was never fond of such sentimental circumstances. I'm calm because one way or another, I've resigned myself to be sealed within you. I don't exactly have any outside connections besides my siblings that I've barely had contact with over many years until recently. I know that we're all free and happy now in our own ways now that the big mess is over, so that's fine with me. Wherever you go, I go. With trembling hands, Naruto asked, what about everyone else? Do you believe they're safe? What? Do you believe that they got out of there safely? If I can believe that my siblings did, can you believe that your friends successfully got out of the situation? But if it's like you said, then how could they have? Do you honestly believe that after everything that's happened, they would let themselves fall like that? Naruto fell silent once more. Was his faith really that weak? Indeed, the circumstances appeared extremely dire, but they were able to care for themselves, right? They were, of course, but he couldn't help but worry. They were among the most important individuals in his life. Well, his response was more determined. I think they could. I mean, I know that they got out of there. No stupid dimensional crap could have stopped them, he said. Good. And remember that you're all shinobi, and shinobi are putting their lives on the line the moment they take their headband. Even if they didn't get out, then what better way than going down saving the world? Yeah, Naruto was at a loss for what to say. He was aware that there was always a chance of dying, but as long as his friends were safe, something they might have felt with him, he didn't really care about his own life. He doesn't know how they managed to get away, but the elemental nations were secure now, and that was the main objective, wasn't it? Although his own desires may have been self-serving, he still deserved a happy ending, didn't he? Of course he did, but he had to be able to handle the situation no matter how it turned out because he knew he might not come out at all. It was bittersweet for him because they didn't fail, but he felt he didn't fully succeed either. The rest of his world was secure, but what about Team 7? The only thing he could do now was trust them. As long as they left and joined the others, he could not give a damn about himself. However, the realization that he might not see any of his friends again was just. He slammed a fist on the metal frame on the side of the bed and yelled, damn it, ignoring any pain he felt. The impact reverberated throughout the room. His lips were quivering, his now clenched fists were twitching, and his breath was getting shaky once more. He had no intention of crying. There would be no benefit to crying. If his friends witnessed him on the verge of tears, what would they say? A tear was already streaming down his cheek. How would they respond? Wait, damn it. From his left, in the direction where he had previously seen the door, a quiet voice asked, are you okay? Before the lights came on with a flick of a switch, he turned to see a small figure in the room's shadows. He wiped away the tears that were welling up, using the moment to get used to the new light. Naruto was able to see who had entered after he had discreetly wiped the perspiration from his face. He saw that it was a young girl, perhaps 10 or 11 years old. She wore a yellow hooded sweatshirt, a blue skirt that fell just above her knees, and white socks that reached her calf. She had brown eyes and short, light brown hair with a red hair clip on the left side of her head. He said, huh? Before scuttling off in a hurry, she said, wait right here. He eventually became aware of the condition of his own clothes after having some alone time. He could tell he was heavily bandaged just by looking down at his arms and chest. When he removed the light blanket from his lower body and noticed more gauze surrounding his boxer-clad body, this was further confirmed. Blotches of blood could seep through a little in small, random places, but if he still had his rapid healing factor, it appeared that the worst of whatever wounds he had received were all well and good now. To the best of his knowledge, he was most likely only experiencing pain and rapidly disappearing scars. He has undoubtedly been injured enough to gauge how long it will take him to heal. Before he knew it, he could hear several footsteps approaching the barely opened door to his left. The girl and a middle-aged man with thin facial hair around his mouth and spiky black hair entered. He was dressed in dark gray pants, dark brown shoes, and a white lab coat over a yellow-collared shirt. "So you're awake? That was faster than expected with how you looked," the man replied. Naruto responded, still attempting to sort out his feelings. Yeah, I've kinda always healed fast." The man smiled broadly and crossed his arms. With a clipboard in hand, he approached Naruto's bedside and said, "Well, aren't you a lucky one?" His daughter trailed behind him. "Now then, since we have a chance, we can finally get some info. We couldn't find any identification on you, just your clothes, of which are no longer usable." Naruto muttered, "Great. Don't worry, we can take care of that later. Anyway, my name is Kurosaki Isshin and this is my daughter, Yuzu. This is my clinic and my son brought you in not too long ago. You were pretty banged up when we treated you. Exhaustion, multiple bruises, deep cuts and a gash just below your hairline, a few fractures in your right arm and leg, and a concussion among some other minor things." Isshin was looking at his clipboard. After giving him a brief glance, Naruto shrugged. "Not too bad, I've had worse." Isshin remarked, not really surprised, "What with that nasty scar that was already on your chest?" Yuzu's eyes widened slightly at this. Before becoming a little nervous and tapping around his neck repeatedly in search of something missing, Naruto touched his bandaged chest. Isshin saw. He pointed over his shoulder near the door and said, "Calm down, your necklace survived. It's with your ripped clothes on the counter over there." When Naruto turned to face the ruined pile of orange and black cloth, he saw that the Shodai's well-known green gem was still securely fastened to the black cord that his Ba-chan had given him while it rested on his headband. He gave Isshin a grateful nod and let out a sigh of relief. "Important?" inquired the father. "Very. Someone very close entrusted it to me." Isshin gave a nod and went on. "Moving on, it doesn't seem you'll have to go anywhere else for treatment since you don't require surgery, so that's good." Naruto gave a wink. "Now can I have your name and age?" Then Naruto said, "Oh, right, sorry, it's Uzumaki Naruto, 16. Isshin extended a hand. He smiled and said, "Then it's nice to meet you, Naruto." After cracking a tiny one of his own, Naruto gave the doctor a quick handshake. As he was getting ready to write down any information, Isshin said, "So, Naruto, do you have anyone we can contact and get everything taken care of?" Well, in that sense, he was utterly out of luck. He could tell this wasn't his home, not even the same country, even without Kurama explicitly telling him. It simply lacked the same presence, and if he had been in any of the shinobi nations, they could have easily determined who to contact based only on his headband. His increasing notoriety also didn't hurt. Naruto mentally prepared himself and said, "No." Yuzu and Isshin blinked at him. Any friends?" "No." "Parents? Orphan? Other relatives?" "None." "School? Not enrolled. Employer?" "Nope." Isshin ignored taking notes and turned to face his blonde patient. He apologized and said, "Didn't you say someone gave you that necklace, or is that person gone now?" With a sigh, Naruto returned to his bed and gazed emotionlessly at the marks on the white ceiling. Naruto glanced sideways at an increasingly anxious Isshin and an even more upset Yuzu, saying, "She's gone, they're gone, everyone's gone. I'll just save you the trouble by saying it's just me alone and there is no one I know around here. I don't even know what here is. There's no records you can find on me anywhere as far as I know since I have absolutely no form of documentation. Hell, I don't even know how this treatment's getting paid for." Isshin looked to reflect for a moment. "Don't worry about the money, it's more important that we need to help figure out just what to do with you. This is much more complicated than I thought." He motioned for Yuzu to follow him as he made his way to the door, saying, "Excuse us for a bit." However, she gave him a supportive smile before turning to follow him and heading out with her father. He grinned in return and watched them leave, returning his attention to his thoughts as he gazed at the ceiling. "What do you plan on doing now?" "No idea. Going to just up and leave this place. Maybe forage for acorns in a park and live amongst the squirrels as one of their own?" "That is the stupidest thing you've said in a while. Just throwing ideas out there, not like it matters what you do, as long as you don't die on me." Naruto rolled his eyes and said, "Your compassion melts my heart. Better than melting your face like I used to want to do." "That's one hell of a silver lining. You have to be positive about stupid things sometimes, Mr. Homeless." Naruto's expression went blank. "Dick." Out of nowhere, Naruto heard muffled shouting coming from inside the house. Strangely enough, it was loud and passionate rather than angry. A few other voices occasionally joined in, but it sounded like Isshin and the person he thought was Yuzu. Naruto chose to wait it out, at least until he figured out what to do next, since he had no idea what to make of it. Isshin and Yuzu eventually gained entry after the door was opened once more, but two additional individuals joined them. One was a young girl who appeared to be Yuzu's age. She had short black hair, was dressed in black shorts and a sort of sports jersey. A young man with bright orange hair, a blue shirt, and gray pants stood beside her. Both had faces that appeared to be naturally disinterested, possibly even frowning. From his now seated position, Naruto gazed directly at Ichigo, who returned the look. "You the one that carried me here?" When the adolescent with orange hair nodded, the blonde extended his hand. "Thanks. Name's Uzumaki Naruto." Ichigo responded by shaking slightly. He pointed down to the girl who gave Naruto a hesitant wave in greeting, to which he returned the gesture, saying, "No problem, and mine's Ichigo. This is my sister, Karen." Naruto caught the young man's attention by saying, "By the way, Ichigo, did you get help for that girl too?" Ichigo's eyebrow went up. "What girl?" Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly and remarked, "The one you found me with. The one in the alley. She was bleeding and had a damn chain sticking out of her chest. At the very least, he had good health regeneration and would have eventually recovered, so this guy should have gotten that girl some help as well." Ichigo's eyes were obviously shocked. "You were able to see her?" It's Naruto's turn to furrow his brow now. He trailed off, struggling to process his memory while staring at nothing. "Well, duh. She was standing right there in broad daylight right before she walked through a wall," he said. Yuzu excitedly exclaimed, "You can see spirits like Oni-chan?" With a sparkle in her eye, drawing attention to her father and sister. Snapping back into it, Naruto turned to face the girl with the brown hair. He yelled, "Spirits? Wait, you mean ghosts?" As a chill ran down his spine. Okay, so he could usually handle anything without fear, but when something could haunt you and mess with you and you couldn't hit it, it was a whole other story. It's just not right. Naruto jerked his head in Ichigo's direction. "You can see ghosts?" In response, Ichigo said, "Don't get all crazy, calm down. You can too apparently." "How?" cried Naruto. "Breath exercises. I don't know." "No, I mean how I can see ghosts. I don't know, maybe you were just born with it like me. This has never happened before. I don't know what to tell you. What, do you want me to say, welcome to hell?" "Not th." Naruto started to reply, but Isshin interrupted him by slapping Ichigo and him on the back of the head. "Quiet," he yelled. While Naruto was bent over trying to endure the pain without cursing the doctor. There were two young girls there, after all. Ichigo merely held his head and shot his father a frustrated glance. Yuzu exclaimed, "Dad, he's still hurt," as she hurriedly examined Naruto. Isshin stopped to watch his daughter lavish Naruto with attention. "Oh, right, oops." When it was his turn, Karen kicked him quickly in the shin, causing him to hold it while hopping in agony. "Control yourself. These are the kind of things that can get you sued. Act your age," she yelled. As a healed Naruto observed this, he was a little unnerved by Isshin's abrupt change in mood and his actual pouting down at his daughter. The serious doctor. What happened to him? "Never mind the ghosts or whatever, let's just get what we were meaning to do out of the way," Ichigo yelled. As he waved Yuzu away to let him know he was okay, Naruto asked, "What do you mean?" With a sigh, Ichigo turned to face his father. "Tell him." Isshin abruptly became serious once more. He said to Naruto, who nodded, "I have 3 questions before I tell you what was decided." Isshin raised a finger. "1. Where are you from?" He said, "Konohagakure, my home village." They all appeared perplexed. Ichigo remarked, "Never heard of it." Naruto sighed. "Of course you haven't," Isshin asked. "So a village? Seems pretty old fashioned to me. Is it isolated?" "From here? Yes, very, very isolated and out of the way. Probably won't find it on a map." Kurama muttered, "No shit," but was disregarded. The head of the household appeared to examine him closely before beaming broadly. "Good enough for me," he exclaimed, causing Yuzu to smile and his other children to give him stern looks of disbelief. Now 2 fingers were raised. "2. What happened to you?" He would never go all ninja to make a point, and they would never believe the truthful response. Oh boy. He didn't want to do anything out of the ordinary and attract attention because he didn't know where he was or whether there were any ninja-like creatures nearby. Thinking ahead and with tact, "Wow, you must have hit your head really hard." The blonde yelled, "Shut up," before turning back to the others. I fell. Okay, really, really, hard, okay, so perhaps he should have gone all ninja." Based on everyone's expressionless expressions, the point was made even more clearly, even though he was technically speaking the truth. Ichigo asked, clearly doubtful. You fell? Yes, Naruto said haltingly. And it wasn't because you were getting into some illegal trouble? Some business with the Yakuza? Any type of criminal activity at all? Isshin asked with seriousness. No, answered Naruto. Ignoring Naruto's whiny, hey, Karen said blandly, that's what a criminal would say. Well, now there's doubt, Ichigo said casually. Isshin waved his son away and turned to face Yuzu, saying, oh, don't worry about that. Go ahead, sweetie. Yuzu nodded firmly and turned to face Naruto, who was observing her with interest. She raised her tiny right pinky without saying anything and gave him a look that suggested she was swearing him into something. As what happened to you criminally related, and are you a criminal or bad person? She inquired. Naruto hesitated even more as he glanced at her outstretched finger, but he still responded, no. She looked visibly back and forth between him and her pinky as she asked, promise? He took her pinky in his own and gently grasped it, saying, yeah, I promise. Yuzu grinned at him and nodded in satisfaction, then turned to face her father gravely. She saluted and said in a firm tone, he's clean. Isshin nodded happily. Really? The shinobi pondered. The justice system must be messed up here. They weren't the only ones who thought it was absurd because Ichigo and Karen simultaneously face-palmed in the next instant. What prevented their family from being normal? Incredulously, Naruto muttered, does that seriously pass? Yep, Yuzu's word is good enough, and if you're a good person, then whatever happened is your business. Wait, WH. Isshin declared, next and final question, to proceed. With 3 fingers now in his hands and his voice dead serious, he said, now I want you to be completely honest with me. With a nod, Naruto got ready. What's with the whiskers? Are they tattoos or something? He inquired. Naruto just gave him an owlish look for a few silent, long seconds. He replied, noticing that even the others appeared interested. No, they're not tattoos, they're birthmarks. Really? Yuzu exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. That's so cute, you're like a cat. They all looked at Naruto's face and saw the similarity as he simply squinted down at her and said, I prefer fox. Isshin muttered, when you think you've seen it all, before getting excited once more and shouting, final bonus question. What? Asked the blonde. You were only going to get this one if you passed the first 3. Now, I want you to think really hard about this. Naruto gave a nod. Alright, do you want to stay here? Naruto gave him a disbelieving glance. Are you serious? Why? A soft smile came to Isshin's face. You look like you really need some support right now. I don't know what happened to you, but I can tell it was something big, and it looks like you need a new start. Whoa, he seemed so sincere when he said that. It appears that he was capable of maturity when it mattered most. And besides, he began, his lips trembling comically as tears began to well up in his eyes, Masaki-chan would have given you a chance. And the man-child is gone. Masaki, said Naruto. As he and Karen watched their father and sister have occasional fits of excessive crying, Ichigo responded, our mom that passed away a few years ago. Where the devil did those tissues come from? With haste, Naruto apologized, oh, I'm sorry. Ichigo looked sideways and asked, don't worry, so, what's your answer? Naruto said, you're okay with this too? Ichigo gave a shrug. It's not a big deal to me, as long as you don't cause trouble. Karen told Naruto, Dad guilt-tripped him by saying, this is what Mom would have wanted. Her brother gave her a stern look. I see, so that's what that yelling was about. Karen rolled her eyes and said, yep, but most of it was Dad begging for advice from a giant poster of our mom. Before Naruto could speak, Ichigo said, don't ask. A revived Isshin yelled, so, Naruto, what's your answer? As he abruptly leapt back in front of the startled blonde expectantly. He noticed that everyone in the room was waiting for him. With little idea of what else to say at the time, he replied, sure, for now I guess. Then it's settled, exclaimed Isshin. Until Naruto here can get back onto his feet he'll stay with us as one of the family. Yay! Cried Yuzu. Isshin went on, and he'll stay in Ichigo's room. Ichigo's gaze grew wide. Whoa, wait, you didn't. It'll be great, he can even go to the same school. Wait, school? I didn't agree to that, Naruto yelled in terror. Isshin paused in the middle of the celebration and gave him a blank stare. What country are we in? Exactly, your poorly isolated mind needs proper education, insisted the father, returning to his insane state of mind. He had no idea that what he had said was making a certain blonde laugh uncontrollably. But how can I enroll if I don't even have identification? Aha, he couldn't be made to leave now. Ishin gave a suspicious grin. Not a problem, I know a guy. All right, so who appeared to be a criminal? Now no more delay. You need to eat and get situated, Yuzu. Help me get him some food, he exclaimed as he hurriedly left the medical room with Yuzu. The three others just stood in awkward silence, staring at the closed door. Naruto said, well, your dad is certainly, yeah, both siblings mumbled, sighing. With a furrowed brow, Naruto remarked, you know, he actually reminds me a little of someone. Ichigo questioned, who? You wouldn't know him, but now that I think about it he's like this guy named Maida Guy, and he was expected to share his residence? Naruto's pupils dilated dangerously quickly as his eyes widened. Naruto returned to lying down and gazing into space without finishing his sentence. Karen and Ichigo remained silent, merely observing to see if he would say anything more. Ichigo? Naruto called to the teenager in a sudden, low voice. Yeah? How often is your dad eccentric? Karen interrupted. Hollowly, she said, 24/7. Huh. Hey, Ichigo, Karen? They both said, Pull the plug, huh? I've lived a good life, so go ahead. It doesn't work that way, Naruto, you sure? Yeah. Oh. Well, that plan is a failure. Kurosaki residence at night. Where are you going, Naruto? Yuzu asked the blonde, who was heading to the front door while she was getting ready for bed because everyone had finished eating an hour earlier. The shinobi, now wearing black pants and a white shirt that Ichigo had loaned him, replied, feel like taking a walk for a while. I won't be long. The clothes would have been much more uncomfortable on his 5'9" frame if he hadn't experienced a larger growth spurt than he anticipated over the past few years. At least his black sandals were still intact, and his black headband was tied just above his black sandals, and the Shodai's necklace was once again fastened firmly around his neck. But what about your injuries? He took off the gauze that had been wrapped around his head, which amazingly revealed only a tiny red mark where the massive gash had previously been, and said, I'm fine, look. Yuzu muttered in awe, wow, you sure you're not escaping? Karen said as she descended the stairs. Naruto gave an eye roll. He remarked cynically, yes, I'm not escaping from the only familiar place that's willing to help me right now. And I also have to learn about this whole ghost thing anyway. Yuzu approached him and lifted her pinky, saying, just in case. With a small laugh, Naruto took hers in his. I promise I'll be back. Yuzu nodded, signaling him to stealthily leave. Ishin seemed to eavesdrop a little as the door closed, but he didn't want to admit it. He peered around the corner. Did Naruto just leave? Yuzu cheerfully answered, yes, but he pinky promised he'd come back. Her father said, oh, okay. He was about to leave for his room when he realized what he was doing. Does he even know his way around here? Yuzu's eyes brightened as she reached the same conclusion. With a freshly poured glass of water in hand, Karen walked back up the stairs and said nonchalantly, too late now. Karakura streets at night. As he strolled through the silent streets of the recently designated Karakura town, Naruto muttered to himself, hands in his pockets, well, that just happened. It's a start. What else would you have done? Naruto let out a sigh. No idea. I guess I got lucky to have met them. Like Ishin said, they're helping me get a fresh start, so I can at least use their kindness to understand exactly what I'm dealing with here. Quick idea, since you seem to be in the clear, try summoning the toads. When Naruto followed the right protocol, biting his thumb to extract blood and applying the required seals, he could not have responded more quickly. Kachiyose no Jutsu, a technique for summoning. As anticipated, there was a puff of smoke, but when it cleared, there was. Since the toads were technically in a different dimension, saying nothing seemed like the last resort. For some reason, they couldn't reverse summon him if he couldn't call them here. Perhaps there had been a contract violation, or perhaps it had nothing to do with this world. For whatever reason, the blonde's still sensitive psyche wasn't helped by the current outcome. Fuck! He yelled angrily as he kicked a glass bottle that had been ignored into a brick wall nearby, causing it to promptly shatter into pieces. In an attempt to calm his nervousness, he started walking quickly in a random direction. Eventually, he discovered that he was following a guided path in a park. Naturally, it was completely deserted, giving it an eerie atmosphere as the moon shone through the cracks in the tree branches and onto the open spaces. He was sitting on a tire swing, moving slightly back and forth with what little momentum he had gained. He wasn't sure when he did it, but in a weird kind of déjà vu, he found himself becoming more conscious of his surroundings. He leaned his head against the main rope that held the swing up and whispered, "We've come a long way. Yep, the last time you were like this you were stupid, lonely, and had no hope of achieving anything. Now you're sorta smarter, sorta lonely given the situation, and you saved the world. Not bad all things considered. In a monotone, he said, "Thank you, your heartfelt words soothe my soul. You have all the time in the world to get used to it now, so prepare your heartstrings. You've become a lot more talkative. Yeah, maybe, but that's only because I didn't really expect to live this long, and who are you going to tell if I say something stupid? No one here would believe you have a demon fox in your gut unless you go all chakra beast. We're partners now anyway, so why not chat more? I've got nothing else to do but sleep." Well, you'll probably be doing that a lot, not like I have to fight any more freaks with a god complex trying to take over the world or anything. I can see your future now, a middle-aged blonde man that let himself go, working as an assistant manager of some rundown business with a bitchy wife at home and ungrateful brats skipping school. Maybe you should sleep now. Nope, I'm annoying you all night. I'm still alive and I'm going to enjoy the time gifted to me, and it's not like you would cut me off anyway, you lonely piece of. When Naruto waited for the Biju to go on, all he heard was silence. Kurama. Quiet. He asked himself in his head, what's wrong? Don't you feel that? Naruto removed his head from the heavy rope and scanned his surroundings for anything Kurama might have picked up. He stared at the dark playground he was beside, seeing only the shadowed leaves of the trees around him and the emptiness that surrounded the space. The only sound he could hear was the cool, light breeze that blew through, pushing the swings nearby just enough to make them squeak in time. He pulsed his chakra because he thought he should sharpen his senses more. This would probably be excessive in a world without ninjas, but he had to be certain that nothing was sneaking up on him. Whatever it was, he sensed it the moment he gave a small pulse. He slowly turned his head to his left, where there were many trees, and discovered the source of the malevolent intent he had come into contact with. This caused a sudden chill down his spine. When he saw it, perhaps 50 yards away, his body froze, all sounds ceased, and his breath stopped. Two beady yellow eyes were barely hidden in the shadows of a single branch, staring directly at him and waiting without blinking, as if they could see exactly what he would do now that they were looking him in the eye. What the hell is that? It appeared to respond to his thoughts as it shifted slightly forward, revealing a portion of what appeared to be a large white mask that resembled a skull but was distorted as it embraced the big creature's face. Naruto abruptly stepped off the tire and kept his gaze fixed on his observer, as though he were defying it to initiate contact. Abruptly, there was a deep, eerie laugh that filled the room. The semi-hidden creature remarked, "Such powerful spiritual energy in one so young, and a human at that." "A human that will kick your ass if you don't get out of there," Naruto screamed, squinting at him as a small amount of the fox's chakra briefly caused his eyes to turn red, making him appear more menacing. As it slowly crawled forward and revealed its unsettling form, it said, "Oh, and he can see me? Maybe not a completely normal human then, but even with so much spiritual power you're not a Shinigami. Yes, you'll be quite the interesting meal." 2 rows of enormous human-like teeth, some of which were cracked, were affixed to the skull-like mask. The shinobi noticed that the remainder of its massive, pitch-black body hung low to the ground, with no more features of its head visible. Faced downward, its entire, surprisingly slender torso featured a concealed, hollowed-out chest that nearly touched the grass blades beneath it. Its door-sized head was staring up at him despite its body's angle, which would put a lot of strain on or possibly break a normal person's neck if they were in that position. Its eerily long arms and legs, which were as thin as its main body, supported its frame. Its knees and elbows all pointed abnormally straight up, reaching roughly 7 feet above its back. Hands with long, thin fingers that resembled claws as they gripped the ground and feet that resembled scorpion appendages but couldn't really be called much were attached to those joints. To put it briefly, it had the appearance of something from a horror film. From a barely open maw, its demonic voice said, "Now if you don't mind, would you please stay still so I can enjoy consuming that sweet soul of yours? Sorry, I still plan on using mine for a little longer. I hope a few more seconds is long enough." Then, with a few nauseating crunches, it flipped its head completely over and swung its jaws wide open. It then screamed in a disgusting and fierce manner before charging at the blonde at high speed. The ninja was replaced by a log, so when it attempted to bite him, all it got was a mouthful of wood. Naruto yelled behind the monster, "Like I said, you shitty movie prop, I'm still using this soul," while hurling an explosive, tagged, chakra, enhanced kunai that was kept in a seal on his wrist, much more practical than a basic pouch that might be lost in combat. The blade stabbed into the creature's side, causing it to grunt in pain before it reached the end of its fuse and tore off a chunk of flesh. The monster roared in pain and rage as it redirected its enraged gaze back to the blonde, tearing and burning flesh flying and blood splattering. It attempted to use its sharp fingers to swipe at Naruto with another rush, but was taken aback when its target turned to smoke right away. That's not gonna work either. Naruto yelled behind him once more, creating a cage Bunshin in his place. With even more irate yellow eyes, the monster chose to challenge its more challenging prey. It turned and extended its right hand, pointing its fingers directly at Uzumaki, who was standing. Following a mental command, the nearly needle-like fingers began firing at Naruto at startling rates. They quickly restocked and began firing like a machine gun. Naruto, unprepared for this type of attack, was hit by multiple blows to his body before using a hasty shunshin, body flicker, to transport onto a nearby tree branch. Naruto used the brief moment he was out of sight to rip out some of the projectiles in his left arm, leg, and side before discarding them. You underestimated the freak. Won't happen again. Those were like oversized senbon. I should be better than this. You can't hide with your Ryatsu as big as it is, you fool! The monster yelled in rage as it swiftly moved toward the tree where Naruto was hiding and used explosive strength to swipe right through the middle of the trunk. As splinters and other pieces of wood flew through the air, some of them leaving tiny cuts on the exposed skin of Naruto's arms and face, he yelled, "Damn it!" and leapt back out into the middle of the grass. It tried to just grab his target and tear him to pieces now that he was in the open. With his opponent just 10 feet away and getting closer, Naruto muttered, "You're not very creative, the only thing special were those stupid fingers, and that's gonna cost you." He threw a smoke bomb with a swift flick of his wrist, and it exploded in front of him in a large black cloud. Unable to stop its momentum, the murderous creature shot through the black smoke and made a last-ditch effort to seize its victim before he could get away. As it slid across the ground and finally came to a hard stop, it was extremely pleased to see that it had successfully wrapped its hands around a struggling Naruto's body. It yelled in Naruto's face, "You thought you were going to get away, you damn piece of meat?" Oddly enough, Naruto ceased to struggle and even developed a savage grin before his whole body exploded, causing the creature to roll backwards 20 feet away. After regaining its senses, it realized that the front of its body was severely burned and that its arms were now just nubs. What's with these stupid magic tricks? This isn't Kido. Don't know what Kido is, but that was Bunshin Daibakuha, clone great explosion. It might as well be magic to you, though, abracadabra, bitch. Naruto's voice boomed from above. The young man he believed would be easy pickings descended from the sky towards him, a strange sphere of energy held in his hand, and the demonic attacker, as wounded as he was, could only look up. Naruto yelled, "Rasengan!" as his blow struck the monster's forehead. The swirling ball quickly began to grind into the mask, causing his opponent to scream as the blow tore and cracked its face. The monster let out one last cry before succumbing to the continuous damage and exploding in black particles that vanished in the wind. Naruto dispersed the Rasengan and observed some of the damage done to the area as he watched the last of his enemies vanish. Okay. First ghosts, whatever the hell that thing was, and some crap called Ryatsu and Kido. I really need to find out what's going on around here. Do it later. After everything that's happened today alone, you're going to need to sleep on it. After taking a deep breath, Naruto remarked, "Sleep sounds so good right now." Deciding to take a break and rest, Naruto began to move forward but stopped in mid-step. What's wrong? Where am I? Damn it, Naruto. The following morning, Kurosaki House, Naruto stood in front of Isshin and his family's home and muttered, "What in the hell happened here?" He was certain that there wasn't a gaping, hastily boarded up hole on the front of the house when he left, even though he hadn't been here long. Isshin said with excitement, "Naruto, glad to see you came back," as he walked out of the house and joined the blonde in examining the damage. Naruto murmured, What did I miss? Something big you wouldn't believe. In the middle of the night someone drove a truck straight through the wall without waking anyone up." A truck. He was aware of what a truck was. When you spend the entire night wandering around a city looking for your temporary residence, you frequently see some cars with this label. Holding his chin in contemplation, he trailed off, "Yep. Thankfully no one was hurt, but I do hope he comes back to apologize someday." "I'm sure he will. Anyway, come in and get some leftover breakfast. Ichigo and the girls already left for school, so it's just us all day." "Yay. Hopefully you'll join Ichigo soon. Just give me some information and I'll get you set up in a day or two." Double yay. The doctor finally noticed the blonde's condition at this point, but Isshin yelled, "Now come on," as he grabbed Naruto's shoulder to usher him. There were tears and rips in his borrowed clothes, as well as sporadic splatters of blood. His bangs hung down in a greasy mess, but not far enough to hide the bags under his weary blue eyes. His face was covered in layers of sweat and dirt where any cuts that had occurred hours earlier had completely healed. His necklace and headband, which hung around his neck without even a scratch, were at least unaffected. Isshin inquired, "What happened to you?" Naruto gazed languidly down with sleepy eyes before meeting Isshin's. "I fell." "Mizuira, what do you mean Ichigo might not come in today?" replied Tatsuki. As he sat down at his desk, a young, short boy with green eyes and black hair began, "Well, when I showed up at his house this morning there was a big hole in the side of his house. His dad said a truck crashed through it last night." "A truck?" exclaimed Tatsuki, startled. She started to say, "Does that mean he's hurt? Or maybe even Dia?" but was interrupted by a book bag gently tapping the back of her head. The now arriving Ichigo looked down at his tomboyish friend, who was rubbing the area where she had been struck, and said, "I'm not dead. Nobody was hurt, sorry to disappoint you." Orihime exclaimed, "Hello, Kurosaki-kun," when her orange-haired classmate unexpectedly showed up. Ichigo sat down at his own desk and said, "Hey, looking as happy as always, Inoue." Next to Mizuira, a young man with medium-length brown hair inquired, "So that's why you're late? Did they get the guy that crashed the truck?" Ichigo responded, not wanting to reveal the baseless attack on his family, as if no one would believe him anyhow. No, Kago. He was gone before any of us knew that it happened." That was ensured by Shinigami. Ichigo heard a deep, manly voice ask, "Do you need help cleaning up?" Ichigo glanced over his shoulder and saw that it was Sado Yasutora, his classmate, a tall, muscular young man with dark skin and wavy brown hair that covered his eyes. Ichigo said, "Nah, it's all right, Chad. Thanks, though." His Mexican friend gave him a slight nod. Kago casually remarked, "Hey, you'd probably destroy more than you can clean up, Chad." Tatsuki asked, "By the way, Ichigo?" "Yeah? Orihime and I saw you carrying that bloody guy away yesterday after school. What happened to him?" If his friends weren't already fascinated by the discussion, they were now. Suddenly, even the majority of the students who could hear them were attempting to listen in on this intriguing installment. "No idea. I just found him in an alley with his clothes messed up, which were weird by the way, and blood all over his body, especially on his head where a nasty gash was." Orihime's brown eyes glowed with concern as she asked, "Is he okay?" Ichigo gave a nod. "There surprisingly wasn't anything too damaging from how he looked when I found him, but what's weird is that he healed way too well." "How well?" inquired Kago. "From what Yuzu told me, that wound on his head was just gone later in the night, like it wasn't ever there, only a little mark where it was. I have no idea how that's possible, even my dad was surprised. This guy was supposed to be bedridden, yet he was able to walk it off with a fractured leg like it was nothing. I don't get it," Ichigo continued. The only real eyebrow raises from the others were those of curiosity and mild skepticism. Kago grinned jokingly and shrugged, "Maybe he's a superhero. Someone sent here to heroically change the minds of women who don't give perfectly good guys a chance at love," he concluded, giving the ceiling a dramatic fist bump. Everyone gave him a blank stare. Tatsuki whispered, "Don't make this about you." "Anyway," Mizuira replied, "are you sure your dad didn't make a mistake at assessing his injuries? That sounds like something straight out of a manga." "Positive. My dad never makes those kinds of mistakes, and I saw most of the wounds myself. His head looked bad enough to get a lot of stitches when I found him, but when I brought him to the clinic it was healed enough to only need disinfectant and bandages. Even some of the smaller scratches were just completely gone, and I know they were there because of the dried blood around the spots I saw them at." Kago grinned and remarked, "Okay, maybe he really is a superhero. Sweet. Or villain," said Mizuira. Kago's eyes grew wide. "He's not a villain, is he, Ichigo?" Ichigo gave him a blank stare in return. "No." Kago's response was dramatic. "How do you know that? He could be plotting his evil plans as we speak." The boy with orange hair shrugged. "He seemed like a decent enough guy. Yuzu and my dad warmed up to him pretty fast, and Karen doesn't seem to mind him." Tatsuki said, "You're saying that like you live with the guy?" "Yeah, he's staying at your house. I understand Patience being there overnight and maybe a little more, but he's actually going to live there?" asked Kago. Ichigo gave a nod. "Turns out the guy has nowhere to go. He had no identification on him, apparently is an orphan and doesn't have any other relatives or friends to contact. He's even from some sort of isolated village that we've never heard of, so there's no records of him anywhere. With him being our age on top of that, my dad and Yuzu instantly felt charitable." Tatsukui muttered, "I see." Just as she heard two strong sniffs coming from the person next to her, she turned to see her best friend's eyes glimmering with unshed tears and her lower lip quivering ferociously in a humorous way. She muttered, "He doesn't have anyone, Tatsuki intervened in an attempt to stop Orihime from making a scene because of her abnormal compassion. "Hey, it's alright. I'm sure he'll be fine, right Ichigo?" she asked, attempting to get the man in question to assist. Sadly, he missed the hint. He waved his hand casually and said, "I don't know. He went for a walk last night and didn't come back by the time we all fell asleep. When I checked in the morning he still wasn't there." With a mental image that only made sense to her, Orihime stammered out, "He's out there alone. What if he's been kidnapped? Doomed to live a lonely life as a house slave to a family of Yakuza robots sent from Pluto to monopolize the baked goods market? What if he escaped today and left the stove on?" That girl has such a vivid imagination. A vibration was heard before anyone could respond to the most bizarre thing their friend had said, at least today. Ichigo reached into his pocket and took out his phone, which was getting a call from an unidentified number, knowing exactly what it was. He held the phone up to his ear after a brief pause. "Hello? Naruto? Where have you been? You got lost. How did you manage to do that? Oh, right, never been around here before. But all night, seriously? Hey, there's no need for that language if you're in public, and what the heck is Datbeo?" Orihime muttered, "Datbeo?" and cast a doubtful glance at her companions, briefly returning to her usual demeanor. She and all the others, including some curious students, watched as Ichigo went on with his conversation in a slightly monotone voice, only receiving shrugs in return. "Whatever, so what are doing, resting? Wait, you and Dad are shopping? Why are? Yeah, I know, fast healing and whatnot, but this is pushing it if you didn't sleep. Oh, so he got you a phone? Really, a ramen app? Yep, technology is amazing, isn't it? There's thousands more. Yes, really, and don't yell into the receiver. See, it hurts, doesn't it? Huh? Oh, hey, Dad. So you took him out? Why didn't you keep him at the house? And why did you listen to him? Letting you borrow Icha? Icha? What does that even mean? Why wouldn't I be worried about it if you're closing down the clinic just for this? Even if it has a giant hole, you. But, fine, do what you want, but you're on your own if someone gets hurt and needs help. You're about to get his information taken care of? So you're really going to enroll him here?" At this, Ichigo's friends arched an eyebrow in curiosity. Ichigo ended the conversation by saying, "Who was that guy you said you knew? Not even a hint. Whatever. I'll see you later then. Bye." He then tapped his screen a few times to add Naruto's number to his contact list just in case. Ichigo pocketed the device and noticed that everyone was staring at him expectantly. That was Naruto, the fast-healing village guy the first was talking about. Turns out he got lost and was walking around the city all night and got back after we all left for school. Now he and my dad are out getting him stuff like a phone apparently, he replied. Orihime cocked her head and asked, "Fish cake?" Ichigo answered, "Maelstrom actually." Yuzu asked the same thing. "So did we hear that right? Is he going to go to school here?" asked Keigo. Ichigo gave a shrug. "I guess, and he kinda needs it anyway since he didn't even know what country we're all in. Like I said, he's from some village and doesn't know much about everything around here. He just discovered smartphones and was all excited. Sounds like an interesting guy. I am so going to show him video games. It'll probably blow his mind." Keigo grinned. Mizuira said, "So when do we get to meet him?" "Whenever you either go to my place or if he gets into school," replied Ichigo. Behind Ichigo, a strangely feminine and familiar voice inquired, "So you're Kurosaki-kun?" When he quickly glanced over his shoulder, he noticed that the person speaking to him was a small, short girl with short black hair and a long bang between her eyes. What on earth is she doing in here? Ichigo thought frantically. The streets of Karakura town, walking slightly behind Isshin, Naruto inquired, "How much farther do we have to go to get to this shop?" As they crossed the street, Isshin exclaimed jokingly, "Just another block, and then we'll get the last of our business today taken care of. You might even be able to attend school tomorrow." "And remind again why I would even go there willingly?" Isshin smiled teasingly and said, "Because if you don't then I can cancel that phone of yours." "Oh yeah," mumbled Naruto as he instinctively gripped his new gadget for protection. Naruto was ushered into the Kurosaki family home early in the morning to get something to fill his empty stomach after returning from his wandering adventure and strange supernatural encounter, which he chose not to discuss at this time. After finishing his meal, he was given another change of clothes and told that he might go shopping the following day to pick up some necessities. Everything went according to plan until Naruto looked out the window and saw a man strolling down the sidewalk with a steaming serving of ramen in a big takeout bag that he had probably picked up from a stand or restaurant of some kind. Even though Naruto was a seasoned combatant who could maintain composure under pressure, there were certain situations that could silence his collected thoughts. One of them just so happened to be ramen. Because of this, it's likely that any memories of his earlier wish to take a shower and take a hibernating nap were seized, choked, and thrown out the metaphorical window into a mental dumpster where they would remain until they were needed again. He told Ishin that he wanted to finish the trip right away and lead the way to whatever stores he had in mind. Ideally close to a place that sold the delicious noodles, of course, because he was hungry for his favorite meal again. As expected, Ishin advised him to take it easy, but after some pleading and a loan of one of his godfather's notorious books, which had been passed down to him, Ishin changed his mind. The father wanted it to be known that he was embarrassed and only consented because Naruto was a skilled negotiator. It probably would have been more credible if he hadn't been grinning as he turned the pages. Soon after, they headed for the shopping area and stopped at several shops that caught their attention, including one that sold cell phones. Ishin made the decision to get him one because it could be useful for a variety of purposes and just to be safe in case he needed to get in touch with someone. Specifically, a GPS to prevent a recurrence of the night before. Naruto didn't think much of it at first, but after learning a few small details about its features, he became quite impressed. He'd wager that everyone back home would have loved to have a gadget that could instantly communicate with anyone in the world and had a ton of helpful features like maps that actually showed his location, among other things. But also having these installed apps that performed a variety of functions, including the ability to order ramen quickly and have it delivered to his location? Hell to the yes. Apart from watching a little TV and occasionally going to a movie, he didn't really engage in much technology back in Konohagakure, but he was aware that this world was far ahead of them. The only other gadgets he was ever truly aware of were tiny items like batteries, cameras, radios they would use in the field, and a few low-processing computers that were primarily used to monitor patients in the hospital. Since he was in there frequently, he should have known, so he would stare at those dumb machines because he couldn't leave without risking Sakura-chan's or Ba-chan's wrath or even Shizune.ne-chan's disappointed expression. The latter hurt more, for whatever reason. In any case, this place was fairly advanced in comparison to the other elemental nations, aside from chakra armor and whatever else Haru no Kuni was creating. For example, earlier, he noticed several TVs in a storefront window that were significantly larger than the typical ones he was accustomed to. In addition, they were flat and had a far better picture. Flat. It was not necessary for them to be a damn box. What else was there in this world? Here he was, fiddling with his new phone in one hand while holding a few shopping bags in the other. Really, who could blame him? In addition to providing an overview of the capabilities of the touch screen gadget, it also included a charming touch of his individuality. This came in the form of a protective phone case that was burned orange and featured a black Uzumaki swirl, of his own design, of course, embedded on the back. A mall kiosk's marvels were amazing. He even acquired his own wardrobe, eliminating the need for him to borrow from either of the Kurosaki family's men. In addition to the headband and necklace that were already around his neck, he was now wearing an orange T-shirt with various, barely noticeable designs that he was unfamiliar with, but who cares because orange, right? Shinobi sandals would have looked a bit strange, so he wore black and white sneakers on his feet in addition to a pair of slightly baggy black pants. Fucking amateurs who prioritize fashion over functionality. The bags he was carrying contained everything he wasn't wearing. By the standards of those now surrounding him, they weren't many and lacked some variety, but they were a beginning. Since he used to own several identical shinobi outfits and only a few other items of clothing for comfort when he wasn't working, it's not like he was a fashionista anyhow. But he really needed at least a small wardrobe because those were mostly gone, save for whatever he had hidden away, which wasn't many and didn't stand out too much like his red sage cloak. Perhaps he could also receive some personalized apparel. However, he really didn't want to take too much advantage of Ishin's wallet. The man was already being very generous, so that would have to wait. It appears that if he wanted more stuff and to start saving money to eventually support himself, he would need to find a job because, no matter how easy it was here, he wouldn't steal anything because his foolish conscience wouldn't allow it. However, as they continued to walk, he continued to receive a lot of looks and sidelong glances despite wearing what was meant to be everyday clothing. He felt a little self-conscious after putting his phone in his pocket and attracting the attention of a certain young woman in the crowd, who instantly turned away. "What's with everyone? I'm pretty sure there's no more blood on me anymore, and I even have my own clothes. What gives?" Naruto pondered. Ishin said over his shoulder, "Aside from the bright yellow hair, whiskers, and bags under your eyes?" Naruto took a moment to reflect on his thoughts. "Alright, I get the whole exhausted look and whiskers, but why my hair? Blonde hair isn't exactly common around here, and when someone does have that color, it usually means they dyed or bleached it. In short, It pretty much gives anyone with blonde hair a sort of delinquent vibe. And I'm guessing the whiskers being mistaken as some sort of face tattoos aren't helping? Ishin gave a nod. The blonde let out a sigh. Whatever. Ishin said encouragingly, don't let it get to ya. Once people get to know you, they'll like you, I'm sure. Naruto whispered, or I save the city from certain death. What was that? Naruto snapped out of his reverie. Nothing. Anyway, how closer are we? As they turned yet another corner, Ishin exclaimed, it should be. Oh, here it is. From the open front yard, they could see what appeared to be a small two-story building that didn't occupy much of the land like the surrounding buildings. From what they could see, it was rather modest and unobtrusive. The only other distinguishing feature was the small car parked next to it, which, if Naruto recalled correctly from what Ishin had told him earlier while they were strolling the streets, was a van. Naruto read the large sign on the front and asked, Urahara shop? Yep. Now come on. We're burning daylight. Ishin rang out as he strode to the door. With a shrug, the blonde shinobi trailed behind him, albeit with a considerably more relaxed gait. Two small children were sweeping in front of the shop's sliding doors as they approached. A girl with black hair had two strands of her bangs hanging in the center of her face, while the rest of her hair was pulled back in two pigtails. The boy had strikingly short red hair. When the kids saw them, Naruto and Ishin could see that the girl's cheeks were always flushed, and they were both wearing identical white shirts with the name of the store on them. The girl wore a pink knee-length skirt with white dots on it, and the boy wore blue pants that only reached his knees. That was the only difference in their outfits. Ishin said, Yo, is Kazuki around? The boy answered right away, but the girl just stared and said nothing. He said, Who wants to know, old man? Ishin continued to concentrate on his purpose for being here despite the child's remark raising a tiny eyebrow and Naruto's barely audible snort of laughter. However, before he could say anything more, the doors opened and a male voice called out. The man said, Now, Jinta, don't be rude. I was actually expecting him. He was tall, with light blonde hair, a stubble on his jawline, a bucket hat with green and white stripes that covered his eyes, a dark cloak with white diamond patterns near the bottom hem, green pants and shirt, Geta sandals, and a small fan in his hand. His features were schooled by Ishin. Kazuki. Ishin. Kazuki smiled slightly in response. Ishin said, It's been a while. More than a while, so it certainly surprised me when you suddenly called for a favor to help a lost little soul, he said, turning his shadowed gaze to focus on Naruto's facial markings, or cat. Naruto's expression changed to one of mild annoyance. Fox, he complained. Ishin inquired, So do you have what I asked for? Kazuki asked, Of course. Ururu? After nodding in response to the unspoken query, the now identified girl entered the store. Kazuki returned his focus to his fellow blonde after observing his young employee shut the doors. So, Uzumaki-san, I understand that you're new around here? Naruto gave a nod. And I assume that you're the guy that's helping us out? Indeed. I have to admit, your story is pretty interesting. A young man such as yourself turning up out of nowhere with various injuries and absolutely no trail to follow. He glanced at Naruto's frame. With a curious tone, he remarked, You look like you've recovered fairly quickly. Without really wanting to give this guy any important information, Naruto replied, I guess I'm just lucky like that. He had a certain quality that made him feel different. Ururu returned with a manila folder rather than a broom before the discussion could go any farther. She approached Naruto and held the folder out for him after approaching Kazuki, who gave her a shove in the direction of their guests. As he accepted the item, he smiled and said, Thank you. She was going to walk back beside her boss after sending him a barely perceptible one in return, but she stopped and continued to stare into his face. Naruto asked, anything wrong? His only response was that she tapped her left cheek a few times and slowly raised a finger to her face. Naruto sighed and smiled resignedly after realizing the hidden message. Then he said simply, Birthmarks. Her eyes widened a little, then she nodded slightly and returned to walking beside Jinta and Kazuki. Ishin questioned Kazuki, So is everything in order? Out of habit, the man in question covered his face with his fan and nodded. He smiled teasingly at Naruto and said, It's all there. All the documentation he needs to get started and even attend school. Isn't that great? Naruto gave him a blank stare. His voice was a whisper, Don't remind me. Ishin remarked, Well, we'd better be going then. Kazuki gave a nod. Don't be a stranger. You too, Naruto, feel free to stop by anytime. I'm sure we have all kinds of wares that would interest you. The shinobi said courteously, I'll keep that in mind. Thanks for helping me out. Hey, the guy may have seemed a little strange, but that doesn't mean he didn't value the assistance. He was also polite. Well, he did after some of his friends and superiors literally hammered them into his head. The store owner dismissed his gratitude with a wave. Don't worry about it. Everyone needs a bit of help every now and then, and I'm sure you'll turn out to be someone very interesting in the coming future, he said with a laugh. Jinta and Ururu silently watched as Naruto and Isshin turned around and left the property, Kazuki waving them off with a small wave. Yeah, sure, thanks again. So, you ready to head back? Isshin asked as the two walked back onto the main sidewalk. Yep, Naruto began, then gave him a fierce look, but you promised to show me a ramen place once we were finished. Isshin laughed. Yeah, there's one we'll bump into on the path we're taking. After giving a satisfied nod, Naruto looked at the files in the folder. Got to admit, that Kazuki guy works fast. Hard to believe he was able to get this ready just from some basic info I told you at dinner last night. Isshin agreed with a grunt. He looked curiously at Naruto and said, Urahara Kazuki, he's always been a resourceful one. What do you think of him? Naruto gave a shrug. Well, the words, stranger, and danger, come to mind, and for some reason seeing a guy who has a good portion of his face hidden while having a van and two child workers seems like a bad combination, he laughed. As they continued their joyful journey, Isshin did nothing but bark with laughter. At the same time, in front of Urahara's shop, Jinta questioned, so who were those guys anyway? After a moment of staring at the corner where Isshin and Naruto vanished, Kazuki said, Don't worry about it. They were just customers. He then put his hands on his hips and grinned down at Jinta and Ururu. Now go on, you two. You both have to help with organizing the storage room. The kids nodded twice, then went back inside to begin their assignment. Before another presence walked beside him, Kazuki turned back to where he had been looking before the two vanished from view. A new, masculine voice said, So you sensed it too? Kazuki gave a nod. Before returning to his shop with his tall and muscular friend, he said, That young man is certainly an interesting one. Given the power he seems to hold, we'll need to keep an eye out for him. Who knows what he'll get himself involved with? Oh well, he seems pretty harmless right now and doesn't seem to have any ill intent, so let's not get too nosy. Let's go help out the kids, Tessai. Afternoon at Kurosaki residence. What on earth is happening in my life? As Ichigo got closer to his family's house, he was mentally exhausted. After his family was attacked, he confronted a Shinigami, a freaking spiritual warrior, and became one himself for what he believed would be that one battle. When he learned that the Shinigami was now enrolled at his school and needed him to cover for her, he reluctantly accepted the position and then engaged in another of those dreadful hollows under intense pressure. After that, there was the amusing incident where a student discovered his unconscious body on the sidewalk outside the school. Being able to see spirits made his life strange enough before late last night, but by morning he had engaged in combat with a demonic creature brandishing a gigantic sword. Sometimes life just throws you curveballs. Another strange element entered Ichigo's life as he opened the front door of his home and turned the corner in the hallway to face the living room. Naturally, this was Naruto, the blonde man who was temporarily staying at his home, but it wasn't the freshly dressed, snoring Naruto sprawled face down on the couch with an arm dangling toward the floor that struck him as odd. Rather, it was the fact that both of his sisters were sitting on his sleeping back, watching TV and eating a bowl of ramen. Ichigo entered and said, Hi, Oni-chan. Yuzu grinned as both sisters noticed their brother's presence. With food in her mouth, Karen muttered, Hey, Ichi.ni. Pointing to the unconscious blonde, he asked, Hey, so what's going on? Yuzu gave the blonde 2 quick pats on the back of his head and said, Naruto had a long day, so he's taking a nap. The blonde responded with a tiny snort and a twitching hand. I can see that. The guy hasn't slept in like 2 days. I meant why you are both sitting on him? After swallowing her meal, Karen responded. Our show's on and these are our spots on the couch. Naruto doesn't mind anyway. Ichigo said as he made his way to the kitchen, I'm pretty sure that's because he can't really do anything right now, but okay then. Dad and Naruto picked up some ramen while they were out. There should be 1 or 2 bowls left for you on the table. Yuzu shouted over her shoulder. Ichigo said, all right. He started to get his portion of the food, but stopped when he noticed a massive stack of empty ramen bowls stacked on top of one another on the counter. Ichigo asked himself, who ate all of this? After hearing him, Karen remarked, that was all Naruto from what Dad said. He had 7 or 8 bowls after he took a shower and passed out here. Ichigo returned with his own bowl and said, damn, he can eat, where's Dad anyway? In his office. I think he's getting everything ready for Naruto to get into school, Yuzu replied. When Isshin joined his family in the living room, he declared, of which he'll be doing in a couple of days. Ichigo asked, so it's all official, huh? Isshin replied, yep, so show him around when the time comes. Ichigo gave a nod and turned to go to his room, but he noticed a familiar gleam in his father's eye. Come on, let him sleep. Nonsense, interrupted Isshin, who took a few steps back in preparation. He's already been asleep for about 2 hours, and he needs to be awake until later on to develop a proper sleeping pattern. Yuzu, Karen, please move out of the way. Yuzu attempted to reason with her father, but the two girls did so right away. Do you really need to do this? Why don't you just wake him up gently? Yuzu asked. This is for his own good. He's going to face the big bad world from now on and he needs to get stronger in every way possible, Isshin responded. Welcome to my life, Ichigo thought, feeling a little sorry for the sleeping blonde. Isshin took one last breath, then sprinted a few paces ahead and jumped into the air, since there was nothing else in his way. Time to wake up, he shouted as he descended, one leg pointed down at Naruto. Nobody anticipated what the worn-out blonde would do next. Naruto abruptly flipped his body over, grabbed Isshin's leg, and used his own forward momentum against the older man to forcefully reroute his body to the opposite side of the living room just as Isshin's kick was about to land on the shinobi's back. As a result, Isshin was startled and yelling as he flew through the air for a split second before colliding with the wall across from him, face first and strangely upside down. For a brief moment, he remained motionless against the wall, but then gravity took hold and his body began to slowly descend. Not surprisingly, his cranium was the first part of his body to hit the living room floor with the top of his head facing the floor. He landed on his back without fanfare, bringing a few broken pieces of the wall down with him. He closed his eyes and moaned, they grow up so fast. The three Kurosaki children simply gazed at their father, who was now immobile, for a brief moment before turning back to face the blonde on the couch. Naruto's eyes were squinted shut, matching his weary and slightly irritated face, and he was sitting up with one arm still pointing forward from aiming his throw. Naruto lay back down and turned on his right side, his back to the family, without even acknowledging that he was aware of what was happening. The room was silent until Naruto's steady breathing returned, signaling that he was once again asleep, assuming he had woken up at all. Was he acting instinctively? Ichigo thought, startled. When the oldest Kurosaki sibling turned back to face his father, he saw Yuzu crouching and shaking his shoulder in an attempt to get a response from Isshin, while Karen kept jabbing Isshin with her foot. Well, though Naruto has only been here a day, he has already hurt his insane father a little bit. He was already starting to lean in the right direction. With a bowl of ramen in hand and nothing else to add to the situation, Ichigo casually began making his way up the stairs while maintaining his signature expression of indifference. Perhaps it wouldn't be so horrible to have a brother who believes in spiritual bullshit around. Morning at the Kuroshi residence, a few days later. In the few days since the brief shopping excursion, not much has happened to Naruto. After receiving his uniform and enrolling in Karakura High School, Naruto eventually had a conversation about the whole seeing spirits situation. He only found out that the Kurosaki children all possessed some capacity to communicate with spirits, much to Isshin's seeming enviousness, though Yuzu could only tell that there was a spiritual presence by the ripples in the air. In contrast, Ichigo and Karen were able to see and communicate with them clearly. However, for some reason, the latter did not truly acknowledge their presence. All he received in response to his questions about how he had suddenly acquired the same skill were collective shrugs and suggestions that perhaps it simply ran in his family or something similar, but since it was only now occurring, that was at best a haphazard guess. There wasn't much going on right now, but he was fairly certain it had to do with this world specifically. He just handled it like everything else, so it doesn't really matter. For whatever reason, he was unable to find enough tranquility to get a decent night's sleep because he knew that a damn ghost could appear at any time. He would feel as though he was going to be ambushed at every tiny crack or sound he could hear in the still night air. For him, ninja paranoia combined with the possibility of ghostly visitors at night was an immediate mental meltdown. Since they shared his room, with Ichigo in his bed and him in a futon against the opposite wall, he could at least feel a little more at ease knowing that Ichigo could take one for the team in the event of a crazy spiritual attack by something particularly eerie, like a laughing and bloody child ghost. An experienced shinobi who has been to hell and back in recent years should not be afraid of anything, so would he really sacrifice a high school student to an alien invader? Indeed, he would. Now, after another guarded sleep, at least for Naruto, they were preparing for a fantastic world of education in the morning. As he gazed down at the gray uniform that was mandatory at Karakura's high school, Naruto remarked, I look stupid, with disgust. The fox yawned and languidly added, stupider. Naruto thought, so don't need your shit right now, and where the hell have you been the past few days? Sleeping. Lazy bastard. Ichigo double checked his book bag and said, deal with it. Everyone has to wear the same thing. As he continued to tinker with various aspects of the uniform, Naruto muttered, then you look stupid too. Ichigo gave his new roommate a grumpy glance but was eventually disregarded. Ichigo's gaze was nothing compared to Tsunade's when she was angry and intoxicated. Ichigo eyed the black cloth with the engraved metal plate tied around his neck and the concealed green gem tucked into his black shirt and said, whatever, but are you still going to wear that headband and necklace? As he prepared to zip up his blazer, Naruto said casually, yep, and if anyone has a problem then they'll just have to take them off by force. However, he chose to leave it open completely, much like Ichigo, who kept his only open around the chest. Ichigo remarked, those things must be important. The blonde said, somewhat sternly, as he involuntarily repositioned the black fabric of the headband, yup. It must be a delicate topic, the adolescent with orange hair reasoned. Isshin entered the living room and asked, you boys ready yet? Naruto looked at his new book bag that was dangling by his side and said, I think. Isshin dismissed him with a wave. You'll be fine. So Mizuira is coming by as usual, Ichigo? Ichigo replied, like always. He should be here any minute now. Naruto asked Ichigo, so, how do you think me meeting everyone is going to go? Ichigo gave a shrug. Should go fine, I guess, but get ready for some looks to be sent your way. My hair has and still does have people judging me at school like I was some sort of bad guy by default, so your hair and whiskers are gonna be good enough to actually draw attention from me for once. Yeah, and maybe you'd help your own reputation by actually smiling once in a while, Naruto replied. Ichigo glared at Naruto with a blank expression. Naruto remarked, you're just proving my point, man. Yuzu entered the room and approached the blonde, still wearing an apron from preparing breakfast earlier. She questioned, you have everything? Naruto casually said, yep. Notebooks? Yes. Pencils? Indeed. Lunch? Affirmative. Phone? No doubt. What about? She walked in drinking a juice box and Karen said, calm down, Yuzu, you don't have to baby him. Yuzu said, but I need to, Karen-chan, it's his first day, as she began rearranging Naruto's hair and uniform while standing on the couch cushions. While fiddling with his phone a little, the blonde himself paid little attention and left her alone. He was a grown-up man by his home's standards, but that didn't mean it didn't feel good to be showered with attention occasionally. Even though he didn't yet have a reputation, that didn't mean he would acknowledge it. Naruto began, yeah, you're not gonna get anywhere with that, after witnessing Yuzu's repeated failure to style his hair. The only way my hair is gonna be affected at all is if you cut it. With a sigh, Yuzu got up from the sofa. As she brushed dust from his trousers, she remarked, well, you're going to need a trim soon anyway, so I'll take care of it then. Cooks, cleans, and cuts hair too. Damn, Ichigo, you got it good here, said Naruto. Yep, was all he said. As Yuzu entered the kitchen to finish another task on her to-do list before preparing for school, she smiled and said, why thank you. At this moment, there were 2 knocks coming from the front door. Ichigo said, guess Mizuiro's here, come on, Naruto, let's get going, and left the living room. Before following Ichigo, Naruto said to Isshin and Karen, okay, later. Isshin said, hope it all goes well. Now go out there and be somebody, as Karen gave him a small wave. Over his shoulder, Naruto called, sure. See ya later, Yuzu. From the kitchen corner, Yuzu's head appeared, bye. When they arrived at the door, Ichigo opened it to find his classmate and friend Mizuira standing calmly. In greeting, Mizuira said, hey, Ichigo. Ichigo said, hey. Then Mizuira saw Naruto. He questioned, so you're Naruto, right? The blonde gave a nod. Mizuira extended his hand. He grinned and said, I'm Kojima Mizuira, nice to finally meet you. Naruto returned the light foxy smile and shook Mizuiro's hand. Nice to meet you too. Ichigo led the way and said, well, let's get going. We can talk some more on the way. Mizuira spoke as the 3 of them began to walk side by side. He casually said to Naruto, Ichigo didn't mention you had face tattoos. The shinobi let out a deep sigh. He was growing weary of saying the same thing over and over again. Classroom at Karakura High School. Before the actual lessons began, the classroom was busy with students chatting with each other. They were going to make the most of any remaining free time because they were running out of time. Keigo leaned back in his desk chair and muttered, putting his arms behind his head, those two are really taking their time. With her chin resting on her hand, Tatsuki added, if they don't arrive here in a minute or two, they're going to be late. From beside Tatsuki, Orihime remarked, I'm sure they have a good reason. Then the door opened, and their teacher, Ochi Misato, a young woman with round glasses on her face and long brown hair in a ponytail, entered. She had a notebook with the lessons for the day in her hand. Everyone hurried to find their desks as she said, everyone get seated, class is about to start. Another person entered through the still open door after everyone had taken their places. Oh, Kojima-san, nice of you to join us. It's strange, you're usually one of the first ones here, said Misato. Well, you see, Mizuira said with a sheepish expression. Abruptly, two more voices could be heard outside the classroom in the hallway. You just had to make a stop, didn't you? We might be late now, a voice that they all recognized as Ichigo's raised in exasperation. Hey, it's not my fault there was a ramen stand on the way here. What, do you expect me not to try it? Exclaimed an unidentified, masculine voice. You could have gone later, Ichigo shot back in an irritating manner. I can't just skip out on opportunities like that. What if I'm dead later? Why would you die? Hit by a car, maybe. You know I'm still getting used to this crap. I almost got hit twice on the way over here. You could have gone without me, you know. If I lost you and something happened, my dad would be on my ass, and I don't need more craziness in my life. I would have found my way eventually. GPS, dude, GPS. Ichigo's voice trailed off when everyone could see he was just outside the class and out of sight. That's not always reliable. Now hurry up before I take that phone and shove it so far up your ass that not even the GPS could find. Oh, we're here, and we barely made it, he said. With a hint of excitement in his voice, the enigmatic voice said, see, it worked out, didn't it? All anger had vanished. Ichigo responded, shut up, as he walked into the classroom and noticed that everyone, including the teacher, was staring at him with curiosity and bewilderment. Ichigo cleared his throat and followed Mizuri to their seats without glancing at anyone in an attempt to hide it. Everyone's eyes suddenly shifted to the young man who followed him in, so he wouldn't have to worry about being the center of attention anyhow. They all noticed that the newcomer's face had 3 black horizontal lines on each cheek, and he was holding his hands carelessly behind his head while squinting his eyes and wearing an easygoing expression. He was quite a sight to behold, with his spiky blonde hair, a headband around his neck, and his false portrayal of the school uniform. In fact, he was right behind his 2 friends when he was abruptly stopped by a hand grabbing his shoulder. His arms dropped to his sides as he looked at the person he assumed to be the teacher, and his eyes opened further, revealing their blue hue. She said, are you the new student? He shrugged and said, I guess. She welcomed him and pulled him back to the front of the class so that everyone could see him. Welcome then, I'm your teacher, Ochi Misato. She said. Everyone, this is Uzumaki Naruto and he'll be joining us from now on. He merely waved a little to say, yo. Misato urged, go on, introduce yourself better than that. How? Tell us a bit about yourself. Like hobbies and other things. He turned to face everyone who was staring at him and began, alright, I'm Uzumaki Naruto and he trailed off, his face twisted in concentration. Kurama remarked, a loud dumbass at times. Naruto tried to ignore his tenant as he went on, his eyebrow twitching subtly. I'm a little outgoing, eats too much of those damnable noodles. My favorite food is ramen. I also hate the 3 minutes it takes to cook it by the way. Is a shinobi with the skills to survive a world war and can kill these weaklings with a napkin. I like to be active and exercise when I can. Is progressing in the sealing arts which is probably too much for his little mind to handle. I practice my calligraphy a little. Wastes time taking care of stupid plant life. I like to water plants and garden on the side. Is an experienced fighter against people that want to take over the world. I dislike jerks that are full of themselves and bad people in general. Is a dimensional traveler with a bleak future at best. With a somewhat forced and sheepish smile, he said, I like to travel and I'd like to think I'm open-minded to what I can learn and experience. I guess that's it for now since I wasn't really prepared. But I had so much more. Go to hell. Naruto chastised himself in his mind. Misato asked the class, well, isn't that certainly interesting? Does anyone have any questions for Uzumaki-san? Keigo's hand shot up instantly. Yes, Asano? Asked Masaki. Do those tattoos mean something, or did you just feel creative one day? He inquired. Though he didn't express it, Naruto was doing everything in his power to keep from losing his temper over the man's persistent question. He took a deep breath and let it out to calm himself, then calmly stated, "They're not tattoos, they're birthmarks." Many pairs of eyes exhibited a hint of surprise and curiosity. Kago said, "Really? Huh, cool." His hand shot up again just as another hand was about to be called. With a hint of irritation in his voice, Naruto hurriedly stated, "No, it's not dyed, it's my natural hair color." Kago's question was oddly answered when he slowly lowered his hand. Surprisingly, the other students did the same. These facts ought to have been part of his introduction. Alright, since no one else has any other questions for Uzumaki-san, we'll begin class now. Go ahead and take a seat next to Kurosaki, Misato said to Naruto. The blonde nodded, went to his desk, sat down, and pulled out a notebook to write down anything helpful she had said. He had only one simple thought when he heard Misato begin speaking and looked down at the white pages. "I detest school, Kami. Lunch period, classroom, Karakura High School." Ichigo called out to Naruto as he was making his way to the door, "Hey, where are you going?" Naruto cast a sidelong glance. He gave the order, keeping his straightforward goal in mind, before continuing his journey. "I saw a soda machine outside at the entrance that caught my eye and I've been mentally committed to get something since. Watch my bag." Ichigo asked, "Don't you already have something to drink in the lunch you packed?" Without turning around, Naruto shot back, mentally committed, and vanished into the corridor. Ichigo rolled his eyes after a moment of staring at the doorway. With a dismissive tone, he said, "Whatever." Orihime pouted little and whimpered, and I wanted to talk to him." Now that everyone was gathered around a particular section of desks to chat and eat together, Ichigo remarked, "He'll be back in a little bit." Ichigo then turned to look at Naruto's bag on his desk and reached for it, but Kago swooped in front of him and took it for himself. From beside Orihime, Tatsuki inquired, "What are you doing?" With a cunning smile, he said, "Hey, he's the one that ditched on some getting to know him time, so I figured we might find out a little bit about him from his notebook," while attempting to prevent Ichigo from reaching Naruto's bag. Mizuira asked, "Why his notebook?" While searching through the shinobi's possessions, Kago hurriedly remarked, "I saw him doodling some stuff earlier, but I couldn't see what." He even went so far as to hold Ichigo at bay by placing his foot outward at his chest. With Kago kicking Ichigo away while the latter was doing his best to control his temper, it was easy to imagine that they were attracting the attention of those who were still in the class. Actually, they were the center of attention now. Ichigo was debating whether or not to punch Kago in the head. "Stop being a prick and just give me his bag," he demanded. "Too late," exclaimed Kago triumphantly as he took out the notebook and began turning the pages to look for anything intriguing. Finding some of the notes the blonde took from the first page onward wasn't too difficult, but upon closer inspection, he noticed that Naruto didn't write much and most likely became bored easily. This led him to notice some of the doodles the blonde drew. Kago looked at the small pictures and said, "And here we are," before humming in an interested manner. "Huh, he's actually pretty good." "Really?" Tatsuki asked, then picked up the book and sat down to look at the drawings herself. Apparently, Naruto's privacy was no longer a concern. When Tatsuki noticed a typical little fox with 9 tails drawn primarily on the side of one page, she muttered, "A fox?" It had the general shape of its body and tail, but only a few small details were added to indicate that it had narrowed eyes and tufts of fur protruding from certain areas of its coat. From his position behind Tatsuki's shoulder, where the others were gathered to get a glimpse as well, including Ichigo, whose efforts were now essentially futile, Mizuira said, "That's not bad. He did say he practiced his calligraphy a little, so maybe that carried on to drawing?" "Maybe," Kago remarked before picking up the notebook and examining a different drawing on the page. "Now let's see what else there is." "Well, that's a weird rabbit." "Rabbit?" a woman asked abruptly next to Kago's ear, causing him to startle and almost yell. Kago yelled, "Don't do that," as he recognized the voice's origin. It was Kuchiki Rukia, who had just joined their class a few days earlier as a transfer. Without answering, Rukia swiftly grabbed the notebook from Kago's grasp and examined the image that piqued her curiosity. It was a tiny bunny with a somewhat chibi and cartoonish style. It was standing on its hind legs, its small paws spread wide, its eyes were noticeably blank and angry, with a vertical line on its forehead, and it was wearing a high-collared kimono with a tomo that looked like a comma running down it. Oddly, it had long hair that reached its feet and 2 horns pointing up from its head. Rukia examined the alleged evil rabbit in great detail, and her only conclusion was. She whispered, "Cute," Orihime and a short-haired girl named Agawa Michiru yelled together, "I wanna see, as they abruptly flanked Rukia's shoulders on both sides. The fact that it was supposed to be a villain was obviously irrelevant to them because, like Rukia, they were silently admiring it. After taking in her favorite animal's sight and utterly disregarding the words, "Suck it, sigh," that featured arrows pointing to each individual image, Rukia turned the page and discovered an unexpected drawing. With its long arm and pointed fingers extended to seize any unfortunate victim who dared to look at it, the creature's upper body was shaded in as though it were leaping out of the page. This monster's true identity was obvious due to its white snarling face that resembled a mask and its skinny, pitch black body. A hollow? Rukia's eyes widened slightly as she thought in shock. Orihime inquired, "What's that supposed to be?" Michiru muttered, a little uneasy, "It's scary." Ichigo leaned over and took a look, then asked, "What is?" His eyes widened in a split second, and Rukia gave him a sympathetic look. 3 other girls stood next to the third floor windows of the classroom, behind the group. The first held a small open book in her hand, had long black hair, and a tiny mole under her left eye. The second wore a uniform that was only marginally less buttoned than usual and had short, curly brown hair. The third wore red framed glasses and had short red hair. Honsho Chizuru, Natsui Mahana, and Kunita Ryo were these 3. As she read on, Ryo casually remarked, "Just a day in and that Naruto guy is already having his privacy violated." Mahana merely shrugged while crossing her arms. "What did you expect with these guys, especially Keigo?" Chizuru cheekily put her arm on Mahana's shoulder and remarked, "Maybe Mr. Whiskers will get back early and cause a scene. That'd be fun to see." Mahana answered, "Don't jinx it, it just might happen." "Come on. Nothing exciting really ever happens around here," exclaimed Chizuru in a dramatic manner. Turning a page, Ryo shot back, "What about a truck crashing through Ichigo's house?" After pondering for a moment, Chizuru nodded candidly. "Well, aside from that," she began as she moved to the window and raised her arms in the air. "But still, this place lacks excitement," she exclaimed, then looked down and muttered, "I think I might have spoken too soon." The other 2 approached her, curious to see where her focus was. Naruto was examining the options the vending machine had to offer down below, close to the entrance, but that wasn't what caught their eye. The small group of male students approaching him from behind caught their attention. Chizuru called over her shoulder to Ichigo and the others, who were alternately examining the blonde's notebook. Guys." As she unpacked her lunch, Tatsuki said, "Yeah?" The redhead said, "You all might want to come look at this." In a matter of seconds, the group of friends and a few other inquisitive students arrived and secured their own spots. Keigo began, "Hey, isn't that?" But Ichigo interrupted him. Ichigo concluded, "Reichi." Keigo concluded, "I guess his suspension ended recently." Ichigo was asked by Mizuira, "And you know exactly what he's going to do, right?" Ichigo gave a nod. "Nothing will ever change about that guy." Chad began to quietly leave the classroom, but Ichigo stopped him in his tracks, causing the tall young man to give him a suspicious look. Ichigo said, "Don't, let's see what happens." Keigo questioned the 2 well-known fighters, "Aren't you going to go help him?" "Not yet. Trust me, I'm pretty sure Naruto can handle himself." Orihime questioned worriedly, "How do you know that?" Ichigo remarked, "I just do," recalling Naruto's act of hurling his father against a wall and the enigmatic hollow image that continued to haunt him. As everyone else was watching the scene outside, Keigo said, "I hope you're right, because it's about to be natural Blondie versus wannabe Blondie and friends." Ichigo and Rukia, who exchanged a brief glance before turning back to Naruto, who was now being confronted, were the ones paying the closest attention. Ichigo reflected, "Let's see what you got. Front entrance, Karakura High School." Naruto rubbed his chin thoughtfully and muttered to himself, decisions. His mind could hardly process the variety of beverages available. There wasn't much to choose from back home, so it was much easier, but the sheer variety forced him to reconsider every choice he had previously been certain he would make. He kept whispering to himself, "All right, maybe that one. No," until he sensed several presences coming toward him. It was quite simple to sense that they wanted to do something with him, so he halted his decision-making process and turned around to face his loved ones. In front of the 5 people, the blonde said, Can I help you?" The young man, who had 3 earrings in his left ear, a ring on his lower lip, and noticeably bleached hair and eyebrows, asked, "You new around here?" With a raised eyebrow, Naruto answered, "Yeah, does it matter?" He ran his fingers through his bleached hair and said, "I guess I can't blame you if you didn't know, but I'm the only one around here that can have this look." He grinned haughtily and said, "So I expect that you'll dye your hair back to whatever it was by tomorrow, right, friend?" Naruto didn't seem impressed. He thought, "Wow, this is kind of pathetic." "Then why don't you put the poor fool out of his misery?" Maybe rough him up a bit to get the point across to him and any other idiots that might have a stupid idea? Plus, it'll be something to sat my boredom, Kurama replied. Nope, it would be disastrous to pit a ninja against a dumb child who has no idea what he's dealing with. And I would have preferred that you got rid of those stupid tattoos, but that'd be asking too much. I am a charitable guy after all. Reichi replied arrogantly. Naruto squinted his eyes. All right, this moron just lost his freebie. 1. This is my natural hair color. 2. I'm not your friend. 3. These are birthmarks, not tattoos. 4. Who are you? And 5. Do you enjoy fishing? Naruto calmly stated, keeping his composure. Reichi replied, Oshima Reichi, and what the hell is this about fishing? With a slightly impatient expression that his friends imitated. Naruto shrugged and held his two closed fists forward, the right palm facing the group and the left palm facing himself. You know, fishing. Look. The middle finger on Naruto's left hand gradually rose to full mast as he began to slowly rotate his right fist, as though he were reeling a fishing rod. See? Fishing? Naruto exclaimed with a sly smile. The only person grinning was him. Reichi announced his new plans while growling at Naruto and making a mental decision. I was just gonna let you go, but now you're gonna be lucky if you leave here conscious, you cocky bastard. Reichi began to scream. Naruto put his hands down. Naruto said indifferently, you weren't hugged enough as a kid, were you? He growled to himself again, then turned back to his unimpressive looking subordinates before jerking his head in the direction of the shinobi. The 4 other delinquents began to charge after receiving the message. The first man to reach him attempted to deliver a careless blow to Naruto's face, but the skilled ninja just sidestepped and kicked him lightly, at least by his standards, in the abdomen, causing him to lurch violently on the ground and cough violently while attempting to contain his breakfast. Well, I guess I'll have to hold back a bit more, Naruto remarked sheepishly. He turned to face the next 2 who were getting closer and noticed that they were a little hesitant after witnessing their friend fall so easily, which made their already low guard even more vulnerable. He was able to easily grab both of their fists with each hand and then cross them in front of him, causing them to collide with their heads on either side. They could only let out a moan and clutch their aching skulls as they fell to the ground. Naruto made sure they wouldn't engage in the small altercation, and then he looked up dully to see the last lackey standing there undecided, seemingly considering whether it was worth hurrying in. Naruto chose to throw him a bone and gave him a shooing gesture to just go because he was the most diminutive in both stature and muscle tone. The little man glanced between Naruto and Reichi, then bowed lightly to both before abruptly dragging his ass back through the school's doors. Everybody gets one. Naruto yelled after him while keeping his eyes fixed on Reichi. Reichi yelled, that's it, as he abruptly pulled away, gave his right hand brass knuckles, and lunged toward the blonde. All Naruto did was roll his eyes and wait for him to come closer. Naruto simply dodged Reichi's first punch when he was within striking range. It went on like this for punch after punch. Nothing connected, and Naruto retreated with every attempt at an attack. He was unaware of the length of time the irate Bleach-haired student attempted to strike him, but he could tell he was losing energy by the way perspiration was slowly covering his skin and the heavier breaths he was taking. For both of our sakes, just end it already, it's only getting sadder at this point, Kurama yelled. Naruto scoffed in his head. Whatever. Naruto timed his counterattack by leaning to his left and extending his right leg after dodging a few more blows. Reichi simply tripped over his opponent's outstretched limb as his desperate haymaker pushed him forward, causing him to fall forward and, shockingly to him, slam head first into the vending machine that Naruto had been staring at moments earlier. The hard impact that left a large dent was enough to knock him out cold, so he wasn't surprised for very long. With a final mutter, Naruto approached Reichi's motionless body, removed the brass knuckles he was holding, and pocketed them. And there we go. Don't need these things being handed down to the next heir of the stupid. This was such a pointless fight. Thunk. Thunk. Never mind. Naruto cheered a little when he noticed that 2 cans had descended from the machine, presumably as a result of a blow that rattled it enough to reveal some loot. Naruto nodded wisely as he picked up the drinks and remarked, the vending machine gods are always watching. Naruto turned toward the entrance with 2 drinks in hand, but before the small altercation began, he noticed a female student standing there with her mouth hanging open and some cash in her hand. She appeared to want to use the vending machine as well. After a few moments of staring at one another, Naruto finally spoke. Did you see all that? She nodded rather quickly, clearly trying to avoid making him angry. And you saw that they started it, right? One more nod. Naruto glanced at one of the 2 cans he was holding and said, all right then. Hey, Do you want this can of juice? Maybe save you some money? After blinking, she gave a barely perceptible nod. Naruto approached her and reluctantly handed her the drink. There, have a nice day, he exclaimed as he made his way back inside. After glancing at her small present and then at the group of motionless, moaning students, the student hurried back inside. She would not be thought to have been involved in this classroom at Karakura High School. As she and the others continued to gaze at the area where Naruto had just left, Tatsuki remarked, "Well, that was interesting." Ichigo?" inquired Kago. "Yeah? Did you know he could fight?" The teenager gave a shrug. Had a hunch he could. Tatsuki's arms were crossed. Intrigued, the seasoned female fighter remarked, "Definitely can from that little show. I think he could even do a lot more. It looked like he wasn't even trying." Orihime said pleasantly, "It was nice of him to give that girl a drink, though." Ryo gave Chizuru an arm nudge. "Still think nothing happens around here?" Chizuru pointed to Ichigo and his male companions and remarked, "Well, with Mr. Whiskers being here, I guess that things will be a little livelier, especially if he hangs around those guys." Ichigo shot her a sardonic glance. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," she began, but Orihime, who was staring at her bewildered, gave her a predatory look as she locked in on her typical target with her hands raised in a squeezing motion. "Haim, come here a second," she exclaimed. Tatsuki merely threatened the vocal lesbian, saying, "Don't even think about it." All of a sudden, they could hear a jaunty whistle approaching their classroom. The source was Naruto, who appeared and made his way back to his desk while sipping from an orange soda can labeled with a cartoon orange that was grinning and winking. As he approached his seat, he noticed that everyone was staring at him silently. He stopped, paused to check behind him for something interesting, then glanced down at his clothing. Nothing that needed attention was revealed by either action. Naruto said, "What? Is there something on my face?" Mizuira and Kago stepped aside to allow the blonde to look out as Ichigo gestured him to the window. When he finally reached the window, he noticed that the 4 people he had defended were getting up. After turning to face the others, Naruto remarked, "That was totally self-defense." Kago smiled nervously and said, "Of course it was, but, you don't have any desire to possibly use that defense into an offense against us, right?" Naruto gave him a look. He raised an eyebrow in response and said, "No, I don't see why I would." Then, with joy, Kago put an arm around the shinobi's shoulder. "Then welcome to our school, buddy. I'm Asano Kago." Naruto then started introducing himself to everyone else. They were all brief greetings and handshakes, though Orihime's was a bit more animated. He reciprocated their kindness, and it appeared that they would get along well. They were finally going to use their lunch break to eat after everything was finished. However, Naruto stopped when he noticed that his notebook was open on someone else's desk and his bag was left strewn on a random seat. Naruto held up his notebook and said, "All right, who messed with this?" Everyone immediately pointed to a tense Kago. Naruto gave him a suspicious look. I just wanted to get to know my future friend better." The shinobi kept staring. "I valiantly tried to guard it, but was eventually overwhelmed." Even Naruto didn't blink. "Please don't hurt me." Karakura town, streets, afternoon. With the exception of Naruto, who enjoyed frightening Kago a little, the remainder of the school day was uneventful. Since nothing significant was written down and they wouldn't even receive what he drew, it's not as if he was truly upset. He simply referred to the inspiration behind the original drawings as spontaneous creativity, when asked why he created them. By the way, he was proud of his creativity. He would show off his newfound skill to Sai if given the opportunity. His handwriting was significantly better after practicing Fuinjutsu. Since they all lived in the same general area, Naruto, Ichigo, Tatsuki, Orihime, Chad, Kago, and Mizuira were now walking home together. However, Naruto abruptly stated that he had to part ways after they had been walking for about halfway and engaging in sporadic conversations. Ichigo said, "Where are you going?" As he awaited the signal to cross the street, Naruto remarked, "Just taking care of a little business. It's the first step in my independence, and I'm not going to live at your house forever." Tatsuki asked, "And that is?" "A job." Later, Naruto exclaimed as he parted ways with the others. Kago asked, "What kind of job do you think he's gonna get?" as they all watched him leave. Ichigo gave a shrug. "No idea. Hopefully it isn't too out of the way that he'll get lost again. I really don't want any nagging from my family." Mizuira said, "Not just your dad?" as they all resumed their stroll. "Yep. Yuzu's starting to get a little motherly over him, so she'd probably get annoyed at me too." "And Karen?" Tatsuki continued. Who knows, maybe she'd give me some sarcastic remark about how I messed up or something. With a small laugh, Mizuhira remarked, and who knows how your dad would exactly react. It's a surprise every time. The teenager with the orange hair sighed. He muttered, yeah. Afternoon at Unagiya shop. The voice was feminine and said, go ahead, say it. With a sigh, Naruto spoke in a bored voice. Hello and welcome. Cheap. Fast. Safe. That's Unagiya, and no, this isn't an eel shop, so find an actual one and shove that eel up your. A blow to the back of his head interrupted his sentence. The woman screamed, do you want to lose your job already? Naruto rubbed the area where he had been struck and glanced back at the jab's origin. Perhaps in her late 20s, the woman was fair. Skinned and strikingly beautiful. She wore a brown cap with googles wrapped around it, tight black pants held up by a belt, black boots and gloves, and a white shirt with long purple sleeves that read, Unagi, across the chest. Her front bangs were parted to the left side of her face, and her raven black hair was pulled back in a ponytail secured with a purple scrunchie. This was Unagiya Ikumi, the proprietor of the Unagiya shop. Her company was a jack of all trade service that performed a wide range of odd jobs as long as the desired work and pay were fair. She was technically the only worker until he arrived, so she did tasks like dusting shelves, moving furniture, walking dogs, and pulling weeds. It was essentially D-rank mission central. As far as he was concerned, this was the only establishment that would even consider giving him a chance. He had previously looked at other options, but they were either overqualified for him, said he didn't fit the image of the type of employee they wanted, or just weren't something he wanted to do. Waving to customers while dressed as an octopus outside a small fish market? Yes, screw that. Even though the work itself almost drove him away, he was fortunate to find this place with an old help wanted sign in the window. As long as he could complete the task, Ikumi didn't really care who he was or how he looked when he expressed interest. She hired him because, according to what he told her, he had experience in this field and was a strong, healthy young man, which she put to the test by having him move some of her heavy belongings. She was now merely putting his public relations abilities to the test in case someone called or came in while she wasn't there. Do you want to lose the only employee actually interested in working for you? Replied Naruto. After exchanging brief glares, Ikumi let out a sigh and put her hand to her eyes. She muttered, I really shouldn't have said I was desperate here. With a corny smile, Naruto added, yep, so now you're stuck with me, Ikumi-chan. Abruptly, she wanted to strike him once more. She pointed to a cardboard box on a nearby table and said, Ikumi-san, brat, but whatever, we'll work on the slogan later. I'm going to put you right to work before it gets too dark. I'm not wasting any of my time where we could be getting something done just to get you settled in. That's where all of the job orders are at, so hurry up and get to it. Before approaching the box and glancing down at the stack of ticket orders that were all mixed up, Naruto muttered, yeah. He asked, you're not very organized, are you? With her arms folded across her chest, she posed the rhetorical question, is complaining part of your job? The shinobi asked, would I get paid more? Ikumi shook her head, saying, just pick something, smartass. Naruto said, alrighty then. He then examined a few tickets before deciding to simply take a handful and go to the door. Wait, that's way too much work. You were only supposed to get. He hurried out the door, slamming it behind him. Don't worry, the quicker everything's done, the more money and more opportunities we'll get from returning customers, right? Later, Ikumi-chan, he said. Ikumi sighed deeply to herself once more, hopelessly still holding out her hand toward Naruto. She said angrily, I swear that kid is going to give me gray hair. She then picked up a job at random from the pile to get her final job of the day. Let's see, cleaning dog crap from Mr. Kitagawa's yard, damn it. Why didn't Naruto save her some trouble by inadvertently grabbing that one? A few hours later, Unagiya shop, Ikumi tapped her arm impatiently and muttered to herself, where the hell is he? She had finished her work some time ago and had been waiting ever since for her blonde employee to return from whatever he was doing. Her patience was wearing thin as the sun began to set. She vowed to find him and introduce her boot with his ass in private if he damaged her company's reputation and caused her to lose any of her regular customers. Additionally, since he indicated his current residence on his application form, it would be a quick search. The front door of her shop finally opened, and Naruto entered with his hands in his pockets just as she was about to lose it. She yelled, took you long enough, well, you didn't want me to do a crappy job, did you? Said Naruto calmly without raising an eyebrow. Ikumi gave an eye roll. She put her hands on her hips and said, whatever, so what job did you end up picking? Naruto just gave her his sly smile and pulled both hands out of his pockets without saying anything. On his left were checks and envelopes containing the necessary funds for each job, while on his right were all the tickets signed by everyone who called in the jobs. When Ikumi abruptly tore everything from his grasp, he didn't have time to react and began examining everything with a look of astonishment and doubt. Naruto said smugly, satisfied. How were you able to do all of this? This would have taken me at least a week. He grinned. I have my ways. The advantages of being a ninja, huh? Really, it was easy to complete all of this work. He only needed to locate an empty space, such as a nearby alley, and make one clone for each task. He and his clones then used Jiraiya's transparency jutsu to safely travel to their designated addresses in order to avoid being discovered. It was a damn good jutsu to possess despite its initial perverted use, especially among all these ordinary people who weren't ninja savvy. Naturally, with the aid of his phone, they would locate a secure location to reappear and carry out their tasks once they had all reached their assigned locations. The next time, he would be more cautious about the tasks he took on because two clones run the risk of being spotted close to one another if multiple clients lived close enough. Fortunately, the tickets only needed signatures and no time stamp. Unless she asked the clients themselves what time it was. Oh well, he enjoyed taking chances. And if you doubt me, call up everyone and confirm it yourself. I did that all with my own hands. Oh, and just a heads up, I don't think I'm going to want to take any more jobs from Kawagishi.ba.san. I don't know if she's somehow really stealthy in her old age, but I swear she pinched my rear while I was watering her flowers, he replied with a mental shiver. Ikumi kept looking at Naruto, the money, and the orders before concluding that she didn't really care or want to know how he did it. She didn't want to lose this kind of effort by questioning him. She would have much less to worry about and more money to earn if he could do this on a regular basis. This young man was indeed a keeper. Ikumi suddenly threw all of the materials in her hands onto the same table from earlier and put an arm around Naruto's neck, forcing his head to rest against the side of her breast while flashing a toothy smile. With a smile, she said, "Why don't I treat you to some tea and snacks to commemorate success on your first day?" and pulled him into the kitchen. Naruto said, no thanks, I got to get back home soon before, as he awkwardly walked alongside her. Don't be so modest, I'm sure whoever you're going back to will understand, now come on and relax. Do I get a choice in this? Nope. K. Unagiya shop. After an hour, Naruto got up from his seat at the kitchen table and said, I really should be going now. All right, then. See you again tomorrow when you get out of school, and if you work like you did today expect more pay and free days, Ikumi said, finishing her last cup of tea. That was her business's advantage. There would be a lot more money and less work to do if they continued to finish jobs at this rate, at least for her. She had a sneaking suspicion that she was exploiting Naruto's enigmatic work ethic, but when she expressed her feelings, Naruto dismissed her, claiming that it didn't matter and that he would be alright as long as he received his fair share. Naruto was about to leave after saying, sounds good, good night. Then he heard some tiny footsteps, and a door near the kitchen opened to reveal a young boy who was probably 9 or 10 years old. Kaoru, Ikumi's son, had scraggly black hair and was rubbing his sleepy-looking eyes, giving the impression that he had just woken up from a nap. According to what he had previously been told, Kaoru was playing at a friend's house while he was away on business. He returned and went to sleep in his room before finishing. Mom, I'm hungry, he said in a barely audible whine. Ikumi said, come here and mommy will get you something. Her voice was so sweet that Naruto never thought the normally tough-skinned woman would say it, but he only met her today, so he assumed she had more than one side. When he turned back to her, he had to admit that he was surprised by her appearance. Her ability to swiftly put on an apron and remove her cap, gloves, and boots without his knowledge made her the epitome of the stereotypical loving mother. She had a very loving smile on her face and was bending over with her arms outstretched, waiting for her son to come hug her. How many more adults would he encounter who instantly changed their personalities? When Kaoru finally saw the blonde, he asked suspiciously, who are you? Ikumi replied politely, sweetie, this is Naruto. He's going to be working with me from now on. Clearly unimpressed, the young boy examined the shinobi from head to toe. There was a brief period of silence before Kaoru mockingly pulled his left eyelid down and stuck his tongue out at the blonde. Before continuously blawing at him, he said, don't even consider getting close to my mom just because she's pretty. Although Naruto appeared composed, he was growing increasingly irritated on the inside. He wasn't going to treat this brat any differently because he already had to deal with this crap with Konohamaru, even though he calmed down after spending some time with him. Naturally, he couldn't give him a gentle pat on the head because Ikumi might kill him with her unexpected strength, which he had previously felt on the back of his own head. Therefore, he decided to take a more psychological approach. You know, kid, I was supposed to leave earlier, but your mom enjoyed my company so much that she insisted that I stay for a while, so we might already be getting more closer than you think, he replied with a shit-eating grin. Kaoru was speechless and unsure of how to respond. Ikumi, on the other hand, was making a concerted effort to maintain her sweet mother persona, and she clenched her fist tightly while her brow twitched equally. Naruto went on. He called over his shoulder, but I guess I've overstayed my welcome, so I'll go home now. Bye, Ikumi-chan. See you again tomorrow, with joy. Kaoru's mother was waving goodbye to the blonde when Kaoru's head snapped to her. He might have seen her hand twitching if he had looked more closely, but naturally, his racing thoughts prevented him from seeing it. How come she didn't correct him? In desperation, the young boy recalled Naruto referring to his mother as Chan. When the front door closed behind him, his head abruptly turned back toward Naruto. What's happening? Karakura Town. Evening streets. Naruto began to make his way back to the Kurosaki home after his minor triumph. He could have simply used the transparency jutsu to move quickly along the rooftops, but instead he wanted to take a leisurely stroll and reflect. For him, at least by his standards, it had been an odd day. He thought of himself as a simple civilian, and he was anything but that, so it felt strange. It simply wasn't typical. Prior to coming here, his normal routine consisted of training and battling for his life. But now that he remembered that altercation he had earlier in the week in the park, that's not quite the case. It said that he had a lot of spiritual power, along with other jargon he didn't understand, but he still didn't really know what that thing was. Perhaps it simply meant the spiritual half of his chakra. Did that imply that these things were attractive to anything or anyone with a discernible level of spiritual power? Did that imply that he was able to see spirits in this world because of his enormous chakra? Fortunately, he hadn't encountered any since the first, and he wanted to maintain that state, but was that monster also a ghost? Well, the thought sends a chill down his spine. He didn't really consider that because he was so accustomed to dealing with strange situations like that. At times, he couldn't help but be a little slow. Perhaps he ought to have told Ichigo or someone else about the possibility that the damn monster was a ghost. He had been discussing it for the entire week, but he was at a loss for words. Perhaps he could have just stated that it was risky and that he just managed to escape in time, since he was obviously unable to bring up the whole being a ninja thing. Abruptly, he stopped moving. Hold on. Should it be possible that this creature was drawn to spiritual power, which he assumed enabled him to see the dead? Would that imply that Ichigo? He was sometimes slow, holy shish. The same negative energy that Naruto had felt prior to the attack in the park suddenly came back to him as if in response to his thoughts. Thankfully, it wasn't directly in the direction of the Kurosaki residence, but it was still close enough to cause him concern. Suddenly, he heard a few grunts in his head. Kurama gave a drowsy grunt. Wah, again? Naruto answered in his head, yeah, I'm going to have to check it out. What if it could be hurting someone? Go on then. Kick its ass. You should be better prepared this time. In order to minimize the chance of being caught employing any shinobi techniques, Naruto nodded and dashed into a shadowy alley. He intended to conceal his physical appearance with the transparency jutsu once he realized he was safe, but something else exposed it first. Meow. Naruto jerked his head toward the alley's entrance. A black cat sat quietly on the sidewalk, its head cocked to the side, staring at him in the scant moonlight that fell on it. The blonde laughed to himself at the false alarm and exhaled with relief. He looked directly into the cat's eyes, covered his lips with his right index finger in jest, and then shushed at it. Playfully, he whispered, "Keep this a secret, okay?" He then made the proper hand seal and vanished from sight, starting his invisible journey by leaping onto the roof of the closest structure and traveling to the spot where he sensed another one of those monsters. A tiny smirk appeared on the cat's face as it observed everything that was happening and realized the blonde was no longer there. Then it spoke in a deep voice. "This is interesting, Omake. Wonders of a New World." As he kept staring at the screen, Naruto asked in confusion, "And you're saying that there are literally hundreds of thousands of these things?" Kago grinned and said, "Yep, maybe even millions, and there's always more being made non-stop. Cool, right?" Naruto mumbled, "Yeah," as his thoughts returned to the buttons he was pushing. Kago was bored on a Saturday afternoon. In a brilliant move, he asked Naruto if he had to work and then invited him to his house. Naruto was persuaded to spend an hour or two at the Asano residence after Kago persuaded him, specifically by promising to blow the new student's mind with what he had to show him. "You'll get over it after a while, trust me." Naturally, Ichigo was also invited to observe this event. However, What was this incredible thing that Kago wished to demonstrate to Naruto? Of course, video games. Slow down, Ichigo. Give him time to concentrate, Kago said. Naruto kept giving the game his full attention. Although he wasn't entirely sure, he was fairly certain that he hadn't blinked since receiving the controller for Kago's console. For him, this was simply unreal. He had never given virtual games much thought before because he was unaware that such things even existed. He did, in a sense, when he noticed a game category among the apps he had previously been looking at, but he never really returned to it because his thoughts were preoccupied with ramen-related possibilities. However, after Kago reminded him of it, he had to acknowledge. He absolutely adored it. For some reason, it was just so funny. It was entertaining to have the power to decide what would happen to the playable elements on screen. With the captivating characters, music, and artwork all on display, he was compelled to give the game his whole focus. As he watched and sipped his water bottle, Ichigo casually remarked, "Jump the turtle." Naruto yelled, "I'll jump the turtle when it's time to jump the goddamn turtle," without looking away from the screen. While Kago was wiping an imaginary tear from his eye, Ichigo was a little surprised by the outburst. "I'm so proud," Kago sniffed, of his first nerd rage. This went on for a while, and to the surprise of Ichigo and Kago, Naruto was actually improving. He might be able to approach Kago's high score if he continued to put forth effort. Unfortunately, it was in vain because the TV screen abruptly turned off, leaving only the reflections of a startled Naruto, an interested Kago, and a furrowed Ichigo visible. Fearfully, Naruto yelled, "Princess, no," while extending his hand toward the screen. Ichigo questioned, "What happened?" To which Kago replied, "Don't know." A female voice said, "There, now I have your attention." The three young men turned from where they were sitting on the couch to look behind them. They saw a slightly older girl standing next to the kitchen counter with the TV remote in her hand, clearly indicating that she was the cause of the sudden halt to their gaming. Mizuho, Kago's elder sister, was the president of the student body at Karakura High School. Like her brother, she had brown hair, but it was pulled back in a ponytail, and her long bangs hung around her face on either side. She was wearing a white t-shirt, black shorts, and short white socks casually because she was at home. His older sister was asked by Kago, "What are you doing?" She folded her arms. "You know the drill. Go get me some juice from the vending machine outside and I'll give back your TV privileges." "Come on. I have guests here, don't be like this now," Kago was grumbling. Mizuho pointed to the two boys and said, "Guests? More than one? I only see Kurosaki here." When Kago noticed that Naruto was no longer seated next to him, he asked in startled bewilderment, "What do you mean, there's also Naru? Where did he go?" The controller that was left behind and the main door being wide open were the only signs that he was present. Kago muttered in wonder, "Did he leave without us noticing?" Ichigo gave a shrug. Mizuho started to say, "Whether he left or not doesn't matter. What does matter is that you still haven't left to get me my..." But Naruto abruptly rushed back in, carrying about a dozen cans in his arms. The blonde approached Mizuho right away and carelessly threw all the cans on the counter, making him grab a handful that were about to fall off. Naruto sputtered out, "There, I didn't know what you wanted, so I got them all. Enjoy," before snatching the remote from her startled hand and returning to his position to play his game. After a few moments of staring at the blonde, Ichigo and Kago exchanged shrugs and returned to watching Naruto play. However, as she kept looking at the juice cans and then at Kago's new friend, Mizuho herself was rendered speechless. Did he simply understand everything in under a minute? She pondered. She ignored the strange moment, picked up one of the cans, opened it noisily, and took a sip before returning to her room. I wonder what Blondie would look like if her head were shaved. Naruto ran along the rooftops, the shadowed buildings flying by. He mentally locked himself onto the dark presence he was racing toward, barely noticing the illuminated windows and signs that showered Karakura in its artificial glow with his blue eyes fixed forward. The blonde was gradually preparing his mind for what lay ahead with each little run, jump, and landing he was doing. No interruptions. Remain composed. Deal with whatever is there as soon as possible. Make a quick escape. As he prepared to make one final leap on the roof of an apartment building, he thought simply, celebrate with ramen. He had just enough time to see where he was going. The same type of beast he had killed the night before his arrival emerged through a two-story building with a huge hole blown through a wall on the second floor, making his target clear. This time, the creature had a skull-like mask and a serpentine body with a full head of dark, scraggly hair. The rest of the body, from torso to tail, was dark gray, but both arms were crimson from just past the shoulders to the fingertips. Its chest had a clean hole through it, just like the first. These details only briefly crossed his mind as he focused his attention on the prisoner in his wide, open grasp. Wait, isn't that? Oh shit, Orihime? As he made the last leap on the rooftop edge, he had a distinct new addition to his self-appointed goal in mind and the first rush of adrenaline in his veins. There was no way it was going to end soon, was there? He still had hopes, even though he wasn't given a precise timeline. If it wasn't, he was certain that he would soon meet his demise. Given how quickly things have been going lately, what he had hoped would be a temporary fix had already begun to feel like a lifetime commitment, and he was certain that this was just the beginning of the spiritual journey. Spirits. How far was he going to fall into their world? He didn't ask for this, really. At a produce market, did his former self make a mistake and cut in front of a voodoo priest waiting in line? He wouldn't completely doubt it at this point. His stunned body was dragging itself off the hard asphalt he had been slammed into, and he was silently cursing the reasons behind it. He was clearly not in the best of moods, as evidenced by the blood dripping down the middle of his forehead, the red liquid running down his nose and chin, and the sight of a Rukia covered in yellow pajamas hovering over his prone body with blurred vision. She yelled, "Ichigo, wake up," into his ear. With a grunt, the orange-haired teenager put a hand to his injured skull. He managed to mutter, "Shut up." His tone was one of obvious annoyance. Rukia appeared irritated herself and managed to momentarily lose her focus despite the gravity of the situation. She half-shouted, "Don't talk to me like that," before settling down. Leaning in to observe for herself, she said, "Anyway, where are you hurt?" At last, Ichigo lowered himself into a crouch. "That doesn't matter, I'll be fine." Rukia gave a nod. "Good, now you need to remember something before getting back to it." Ichigo looked at her and focused entirely on her. She gave the order as seriously as a short girl wearing bright flannel pajamas could. "That's not Inoe's brother anymore. He's nothing but a monster without a human's heart. Like with him and other hollows, you can't show mercy and must kill him without fail." Ichigo only responded with a stern look of his own before turning back to the hole he had been blown out of. What he heard next would have prevented him from returning to action sooner. He heard the brother-turned hollow yell, "I'll kill you." What struck him as grim was that it wasn't aimed at him or Rukia. He let out a short cry of effort and jumped to the second floor of Inoe's house, his big blade ready to strike however he saw fit. When he reached his desired height, he saw Inoue tightly grasped by the hollow's hands, her face growing more and more agonized with each passing second. Ichigo, not wanting to waste any more time, swiftly swung his weapon in the direction of the monster's scaly tail in an attempt to divert his attention from his friend. But he was so preoccupied that he failed to notice when another participant chose to enter the fight. The same could not be said for an irritated Rukia who was still on the street and had no convenient way to get to the altercation. The fact that she had Riryoku at all in the Gigai she was inhabiting was just another annoying reminder that her powers were extremely low and only marginally stronger than those of an average human. She felt something approaching the area quickly as her thoughts turned to figuring out how to help in the skirmish, so quickly that if she were the target of this approaching unknown entity, Ichigo would be too busy fighting to defend herself. Fortunately, that wasn't the case because she saw a brief, vocal blur cross her head and move in the direction of Ichigo's position. Her gaze expanded. What? Just before his blade touched hollow flesh, the new presence announced his arrival, and the substitute Shinigami was unable to respond at all. Naruto exclaimed, startled, dynamic onter. Ichigo. While his extended foot continued to focus on the beast's head. The blonde unintentionally dropped the transparency jutsu because he was shocked that his current roommate was also involved in this whole mess. For both spiky-haired teenagers, time seemed to drastically slow down as they continued to advance with each attack while staring at each other's shocked expressions. A shouting, still. Flying Naruto, his own open-mouthed, dumbfounded expression, and the shocked expression on the normally stoic Ichigo's face would have made for a pretty sight if it weren't for the urgency of the scene. After their attacks struck home, both of their viewpoints rapidly returned to normal. While Naruto's opening kick crashed into the monster's face, Ichigo's blade roughly stabbed into his target's largest appendage. He let go of his little sister's shackled soul as the attacks stunned the hollow and caused it to roar from both fresh experiences of agony. Orihime felt some relief from the squeezing pressure she had been subjected to as her body collapsed onto the wooden floor. She let out a few coughs and groaned in pain from the hard landing, then looked up at the creature that had once been her cherished sibling as he flailed in pain for a moment. After Ichigo finished hacking at her brother's tail, she turned to face the most recent surprise of her evening. Looking at him with one brown eye open, she muttered in confusion, "Uzumaki-kun." With his bright yellow hair and cheek whiskers, it was easy to mistake the newest member of her class. After helping to free her, She witnessed his fall from lingering disbelief, then his swift recovery and approach to an unconscious and injured Tatsuki. He appeared to be aware of the tomboy as well, as he hurried to assess her condition before turning to stand guard between her and the rapidly convalescing beast. The blonde's arrival left her unsure of how to react, but at this point, the whole situation wasn't all that crazy. Her normally insane imagination was completely blown away by everything that has transpired in the last few minutes. Before attacking her and Tatsuki, a bizarre ghost monster first appeared and made its presence known through her teddy bear. Then, before he began fighting his opponent, Ichigo showed up with a big sword and an odd outfit to deflect an attack that was aimed at her. The monster's true identity was then revealed to be her deceased brother, who was furious with her for not praying for him. He thought he was vanishing from her heart, only to be replaced by Ichigo and Tatsuki, who were close to her. In this brief altercation, Naruto most recently assisted Ichigo in protecting Tatsuki and herself. Her mind would have wandered to many different places with the appearance of not one, but two knights in shining armor if she hadn't been in this predicament. Maybe she would have made up stories about these two's other heroic deeds, such as her and Tatsuki killing a dragon on the side or tag. Team fighting aliens in a pay.per view wrestling ring. The match would only be shown on TV on Earth and Jupiter, with Mars excluded due to a political dispute involving a unifying marriage that had grown weary due to disagreements over the color of the couple's drapes in their galactic home. Yes, it would have been pleasant to think about that for at least an hour or two. However, her thoughts now returned to Ichigo's arrival and the addition of Naruto to the mix. How did they manage to fight her brother, who appeared to be strong, and why were they here? Although she is aware of Ichigo's combat background, it seemed absurd that he could wield such a large blade and display such strange supernatural powers as standing on air. She saw Naruto defend himself earlier in the day, so she could say the same thing about him, but aside from that one kick and grab, it seemed more like fancy dodging than anything else. Her first impression of the blonde was that he was a fun person, but she didn't know much more about him than his first extreme encounter with Ichigo and what she got from feeling his personality during the day. They didn't talk much during or after school, but he always had a smile on his face and readily agreed to whatever silly things she enthralled everyone with. Naturally, none of that could have been legitimately connected to his unexpected appearance here. When she refocused on the entire scene, she noticed that Ichigo had swiftly moved to separate her from her assailant, even though her transformed brother was backing away and had finally recovered from both attacks. The teenager in black robes was clearly staring at the hollow and Naruto with his blade raised and prepared to defend at any time. Naruto gave the eldest Kurosaki sibling a very inquisitive glance, clearly examining him from head to toe before appearing to ask, "What the hell are you wearing?" His eyes were sapphire. How ironic. Orihime sensed a fresh tension in the air, and for a moment, she was afraid of what might happen in this unfamiliar circumstance. She was relieved to see Ichigo's protective side, glance and Naruto's quickly shifting expression of focus. She saw the blonde give her a reassuring glance before turning to face the other male teen. They exchanged a brief glare before Naruto turned to face Tatsuki and Orihime and nodded at the now repaired hollow, making his point apparent. "Keep them safe. Take care of the snake. Later, we can talk." As Ichigo and Naruto faced their shared foe, Ichigo was able to comprehend it fairly well, while Naruto swiftly created two kunai from seemingly nothing into each hand in a reverse style for optimal stabbing and slashing. The Shinigami continued to keep his sword ready. Those who witnessed the shinobi perform the act were only more intrigued, but for the time being, that would have to wait. With a low growl, the tainted spirit monster turned to face the first force of opposition. His left eye was the only part of his body that resembled a human, while his right eye was as hollow as the creature's namesake. He screamed, "Why must you interfere, Kurosaki Ichigo?" and then glared at the blonde in the uniform. "And who are you supposed to be? Some pathetic Shinigami lackey? Why won't you all understand that Orihime is mine and no one else's? It was me that took care of her. Me. I took her away from our satanic father and whore of a mother and raised her myself. We did just fine by ourselves and I'm not giving her away to anyone, especially you, Kurosaki." Naruto became increasingly intrigued by the entire scene. Wait, is this thing really her brother? How on earth is that possible? She truly inherited all of her good genes from her family, damn it. Kurama decided to weigh in at that point. We must have missed a serious monologue. In light of this, Orihime's brother launched an assault, choosing to go after the biggest obstacle he had encountered thus far. "Oni-chan," Orihime exclaimed in alarm, not wanting Ichigo to be put in further danger nor her brother to carry on with his violent ways. Ichigo leapt forward to confront his opponent in the center of the room, striking the enormous, gaping maw of the hollow with his blade. The blade was successfully wedged between some upper and lower teeth, resulting in a stalemate. After pausing to confirm Ichigo's combat readiness, Naruto leapt up from behind the other male adolescent. He then channeled wind chakra into each of his kunai before severing his opponent's left arm at the elbow. As soon as he got behind him, Naruto swiftly chopped off his injured tail in the middle, and blood began to pour out of the stump. The male Inoue was forced to desperately escape Ichigo's guard and attempt to swipe at the blonde behind him with his right arm due to Ichigo and Naruto's combined defense and offense. Before rolling on the ground and gracefully standing up, Naruto leapt and dove over the big claw-like hand. Ichigo swung his weapon across his opponent's back, taking advantage of his opening. Although the Hollow's head was the crucial target, the kill shot was ultimately made easier by every little bit that slowed him down. The Hollow screamed in agony and rage once more. He began to realize, after looking at both teenagers, that he would be exhausted sooner rather than later and probably wouldn't have the opportunity to achieve his objective. With a fresh strategy in mind, he spun around and hurled himself as quickly as he could in the direction of the orange-haired Shinigami, seemingly attempting to bite him once more. Seeing him approaching, Ichigo got ready to perform the same block as before, thinking that the Hollow's repetition was beginning to indicate that they were winning the battle. Ichigo was surprised that his opponent chose to sidestep his defense rather than launch a full frontal attack. As a result, Ichigo was forced to parry while the Hollow proceeded to the opposite side of the room and toward his sister, who was becoming more and more terrified. Inoue, who had died, cried out, "If she won't live for me, then she'll just have to die for me instead," as though the outcome was certain. Ichigo yelled, "Inoue," as he realized he would not have much time to stop Orihime's brother. It appeared as though Shinigami and the Hollow had forgotten the other player's existence in this game. Without missing a beat, Naruto swiftly switched with a piece of debris beside Orihime using the Kawarimi no Jutsu body replacement technique, then swiftly grabbed her and leapt out of the Hollow's rushing serpentine attack. In the hasty escape, the blonde landed next to the now soulless bodies of Tatsuki and Orihime. As he and Orihime watched the assailant continue to slam into another wall, Naruto didn't appear to be paying attention to the girl's dual presence and connected spiritual chain. He had to quickly use his remaining hand to claw at the wooden floorboards after making a new hole clear to the outside to match the other. After digging into the surface and leaving a trail of ragged wood chips behind him, his sharp fingers came to a stop while dangling off the edge. During that moment, Naruto released Orihime from his hold and allowed her to stand unsteadily while she attempted to regain her balance. She quickly straightened up and cast an even more amazed look at Naruto. In addition to how quickly he was able to move her out of the way, whatever he just did increased her curiosity about him and Ichigo, if that was even possible. A tiny part of her found it enjoyable because of the rapid and abrupt motion of everything, which idly reminded her of a roller coaster. Whoa, perhaps he was a superhero, as Asano claimed. Did that imply Ichigo was also one? Naturally, that thought was quickly dashed when she noticed Ichigo joining Naruto as they approached her and appeared to be planning to attack together this time. That is, until she suddenly became aware that something was wrong. When she looked at her physical body, she instantly understood why. "My hairpin!" she exclaimed, startled to discover that one of the flower-themed hairpins she wore religiously all the time, aside from when she slept, had vanished from her head. The same missing spot on her right side was discovered by quickly feeling her spiritual head. She began frantically searching for her lost treasure and wondering when it had been stolen in the first place. When she spoke, Ichigo and Naruto stopped and turned back to face her. After a brief moment of reflection, Ichigo appeared to grasp the situation better, while Naruto appeared to be more perplexed. You still have them?" Both male teenagers instantly tensed and got ready to fight again as the demonic voice captured their attention. In the middle of his one-armed ascent back into the room, they noticed that the Hollow's upper body was hunched over the edge of the second-story floor. Then he saw a tiny glint in the debris close to where he was. The missing half of his sister's first and final gift from him appeared to reflect the full moon's light as it entered the destroyed apartment. He began to crawl again, but not toward the male teenagers. Rather, in a conspicuous silence, he approached the gleaming object slowly. Neither Ichigo nor Naruto took any abrupt action, with Ichigo seemingly telling Naruto to hold off until he had come to his own conclusions. When their adversary approached the hairpin and lowered his enormous hand gently to the wooden surface, they saw him pause for a moment. He picked up the flower-like accessory with extreme caution, using the tips of his black fingers. He raised the object to his face and gave it a serious, analytical look. They all heard him whisper, his tone becoming noticeably more human. I thought you threw them away." Orihime said, "Why would I ever do that?" as she moved to a location between Ichigo and Naruto. Her brother grunted, Orihime began to advance, both men ready at her side. Both of them were wary, but Naruto could tell when a corny conversation was about to start. Naturally, from experience. I wouldn't throw away a gift from someone I loved, still love so much, that wouldn't be right. She went on. Ever since you passed I've always warned them to honor you. I may have stopped praying for you, but when I started to talk about my friends and all the fun things that happened at school I just wanted to show you that I'm happy, and that you don't need to worry about me and could rest easy. I've made more friends recently, and have tried to get closer to those I already have, hoping to have them care about me as I do for them, to always be there for each other, just like how you watched out for the both us all those years, she concluded, tears still streaming from her eyes and a sad grin on her lovely face. Before his masked face began to crumble into rapidly vanishing black fragments, the oldest Inoue remained silent and took another look at the lone hairpin, his thoughts racing. The trio saw the Inoue's actual face, devoid of any residual rage. No, I always knew what you were trying to do, I just didn't want you to completely move on from me. I was blind, I wanted you all to myself, the brother was muttering to himself. Ichigo shot back, obviously that's where you screwed up. Inoue is Inoue. She isn't a trophy that belongs to a single person. Since it was Naruto's first time speaking, they were all taken aback when he said what he said, and gestured to Ichigo from his position. He caught their quiet looks. What? He asked. The blonde caught the attention of the now calm Hollow. You're him, Naruto, right? The shinobi gave a startled blink and a fast nod. Naruto left the question open, ended, saying, yeah. How did you? Orihime, she talked about you today, a new friend, your physical description isn't exactly hard to recognize, same as Kurosaki in that regard. Once more, the blonde blinked. Oh, he said softly. He glanced at the other two and saw Orihime's almost constant smile starting to pull at her cheeks, while Ichigo shrugged his typical expression. All of them turned to watch Orihime's brother become quiet once more and appear to be gazing into space for a while. After giving it some thought in silence, he narrowed his eyes and locked his gaze on Ichigo. Ichigo and the others briefly believed he was going to start fighting again, but the way he came at them with a certain expression in his resolute eyes suggested a different, non-threatening objective. The Hollow used his remaining hand to seize the Shinigami's bare blade since nothing stood in his way. When they saw him aiming the blade at himself, precisely where any Hollow would be most vulnerable, they all ignored the few drops of blood that were beginning to trickle down the metal. Orihime saw that the tip was getting close to her brother's forehead, then she whispered, Oni-chan. The other two appeared to be startled out of their reverie by her voice. Wait, you don't have to. Ichigo began. A female voice yelled, Ichigo, from behind. They all turned to look at Rukia, who was dressed entirely in yellow pajamas, sporting a small, comforting smile and some obvious dirt stains on her face and person. Cutting them with a Zanpakuto isn't killing him. It'll wash away his sins and send him off to Soul Society to be at peace. Don't worry, this is the job of all Shinigami and the reason we exist, she replied with calmness. This Shinigami stuff again, Naruto thought for a moment. That's why I have to disappear before I lose myself again. The older Inoue interrupted, his mature eyes displaying a clear but melancholy understanding. Ichigo nodded and let his former opponent use his blade as needed, quickly realizing the situation himself. Naruto just looked on sympathetically, taking in as much information as he could. The idea that these were her brother's final moments before formally moving on caused Orihime's eyes to well up with tears. The male Inoue said, Ichigo, Naruto, and both of them turned to watch. With a serious expression, he asked, please watch over her. He knew that with the skills they possessed, they could shield his younger sister from the world he had been exposed to, even though it might seem strange to ask of these two. One he had once hated and the other he hardly knew at all. Given that he was certain they would draw the wrong kind of attention, she might be just as safe staying as far away from them as possible, but that would probably be asking too much given that his sister was already developing feelings for one and becoming friends with the other. Neither man spoke, but they both nodded after a brief silence, one with a serious scowl and the other with the beginnings of a playful smile. Orihime abruptly yelled, wait, as she dashed in near her sibling. When she was only a few feet away, she paused and looked up into his inquisitive face. I've always wanted to say what I couldn't that night before you left. She smiled broadly at her brother with all the love she could muster, and as a tear ran down her cheek, she said, see y'all later, Sora.ni. Sora's eyes widened just a bit before he gazed down at his beloved sister with affection. Yeah, see y'all later, I hope we meet again someday. And he stabbed himself with the blade as the last word left his mouth. As soon as he was ready to die, his body began to break apart into a collection of glowing fragments. With the moonlight behind him, The fragments of his soul glittered in a white glow as they drifted off into the night sky to join the stars, and every single part of his changed body gradually started to fade away. The sword clanked to the floor in a long echo, and the last thing they saw of him was his smile. As they all took in what had just transpired, everyone fell silent. Orihime herself took her time walking to the spot where her brother used to be and looked up at the sky. She silently offered one final prayer for her brother's welfare, even though a few more tears began to fall down her cheeks. Naruto took a moment to lean in close to the others while they were all giving the last Inoue some alone time. He said in a whisper over Rukia's head, "Hey, Ichigo?" "Yeah?" he returned in a whisper. He asked in a frustrated voice, "What the hell, man?" and pointed to everything nearby with a slow head turn and tired eyes. Ichigo's expression was similar to his, but it was more irritated and disbelieving. He half yelled, half whispered, "What the hell, me? What the hell, you?" in response. What was all that? Jumping in here like some lunatic and magically making some knives appear out of nothing? Before Naruto swiftly closed them again, they both looked at the kunai that was still in the blonde's grasp. "Yes, that. What the hell is that?" he added, pointing wildly at Naruto's hands, which somewhat irritated Rukia because his appendage was in front of her face. Naruto returned fire. He got in the bright-haired teen's face and shot back, "Don't act like I'm the only weird one. What's with your emo bathrobe of death and that overcompensating sword?" "It's not a bathrobe, you blonde fishcake. It's maelstrom, ya frickin' dingleberry. It's strawberry. I mean to protect one. Sounds the same to me, Dabbeo." Again, what the hell does that even mean? They were too preoccupied with their hushed dispute over name meanings to notice that Rukia had moved stealthily to the side of the room as Orihime was heading for her two saviors. "Kurosaki-kun. Uzumaki-kun. What are you talking about?" She tilted her head innocently. The two men halted their captivating conversation abruptly and muttered, "Nothing." Orihime merely gave them a confused little blink before her eyes brightened. "Anyway, how were you both able to do all that fighting and magic stuff? It was amazing. I have so many quests." She was unable to proceed because she was too excited to notice that Rukia had ambushed her from behind and was holding a tiny device up to her face. Her vision was abruptly obscured by a puff of smoke, and as she collapsed to the ground, she felt herself disappear into her own ridiculous unconscious world. The cartoonish bird head on the end of the wriggling spring that was ejected with the smoke surprised the other two, who appeared shocked by the action. Ichigo yelled, "What did you do, Rukia?" With little concern, she said, "Oh, I used the Kikanshinki account. Replacing spirit device," and hurried over to where Tatsuki was standing on the opposite side of the room. "Kikanshinki?" Naruto whispered as he walked up to Orihime's spirit body to check for any visible physical harm. Rukia explained, occasionally grunting with effort as she dragged Tatsuki and Orihime's physical body beside the chained soul. "It knocks out whoever it's used on so they forget whatever they saw and gain a new memory at random in its place. The new memory is limited by the person's imagination and what they would realistically believe." Ichigo watched doubtfully and said, "That isn't going to give Orihime brain damage, is it?" As Rukia held her palms over the tomboy's easily treated wounds, her hands began to glow. As she completed Tatsuki's recovery, she said, "Unlikely. As far as I know, the Kikanshinki has a 99.9% success rate." She then used the memory device on herself. Naruto watched this entire process and asked, "And the other 0.1%? For a fleeting moment, Rukia's face flinched before returning to her work. She casually said, "Don't worry about it." After a moment of staring at the short girl while she cleaned the blood, Naruto shook his head angrily and turned back to the other male. "Wait, never mind that. Ichigo, please explain all this crap that happened before I lose my mind." Ichigo swiftly returned to Naruto's tone. He screamed angrily, "Hold it, I got my own questions too, damn it." To put it bluntly, Naruto turned to face the weaker Shinigami and said, "Rukia, right? I'm more in the dark than you, so I think my questions are more important. Like, why did this happen? How many of those monsters are out there? Why are you fighting said monsters? Why is?" After somehow making Orihime whole again without them noticing, she nodded and dusted herself off. The blonde turned to face Ichigo again. "Why is Rukia wearing Yuzu's pajamas? Why is she even here and how was she doing that hand glowy healing crap? Do these freaks all have some sort of white masks like the first one earlier in the—" "So you did see a hollow before?" Ichigo yelled, accusingly pointing at the female. "Why didn't you tell me? Are you planning something?" The Uzumaki continued to trudge. "Don't turn this back on me. I asked first. In fact, why didn't you tell me anything about these hollow things if you knew I would have any chance at all seeing them?" You were already freaked out about the paranormal, so he didn't see it as important and to also keep your mind peaceful and oblivious. We also didn't know if you even attracted them in the first place considering you just started seeing spirits. Of course that was before knowing you could defend yourself in such a powerful manner, Rukia said quietly. Naruto gave her a quick glance before turning to face Ichigo, his eyes tinged with treachery. I told you that in confidence, man. With a roll of his eyes, Ichigo resumed his teasing of the agitated ninja. Rukia was tiptoeing up from behind Naruto, barefoot, with the Kikanshinki in hand and her tongue sticking out in concentration, but they were too preoccupied with their own hysterics to notice her. Rukia jumped to ambush the blonde just before the argument was about to get physical, just like she did with Orihime, but this target was aware of the attacks. Instead of Rukia activating the device from her position on his upper back, the shinobi swiftly grabbed the wrist holding the Shinigami's tool and raised the girl into the air with his arm fully extended. Although it was caught and harmlessly released a puff of smoke above her and Naruto's head, the Kikanshinki was still triggered. Until he raised the girl to his eye level, Naruto kept holding her in the air. Did you just try to wipe me? He asked, his brow twitching in frustration. She gave him a blank stare in return. She said, perhaps. Ichigo gazed at Rukia's pathetic figure and questioned, why did you do that, Rukia? From her dangling position, she tried her best to shrug. I figured we'd be able to properly question him under better circumstances in the future, preferably with us well ahead of him in information, she responded. Naruto gave her a forehead flick. Before taking the Kikanshinki from her and pocketing it, he reprimanded her, saying, that's just rude, so I'll just take this until everything is figured out and I know my brain won't be raped. Then he put her back on the floor and faced Ichigo once more. Anyway, before we get right into the root of all this bullcrap, I'd like to clarify one last thing. And that is? Replied Ichigo. Naruto asked, we're in a heavily populated area, aren't we? Rukia, who was extending her agitated arm, and Ichigo both nodded. The blonde went on, opening his arms and pointing to the entire ruined room, so how the hell hasn't anyone noticed all of this going on? Shinigami both blinked. Actually, that was a really good question. Then the distant sirens began to sound. Ichigo, who knew the source, and Rukia and Naruto, who were immediately intrigued, all three of them jerked at the reverberating sound. Ichigo yelled, we'll continue this later, but we got to get out of here, until he came to his senses and became more composed. Oh wait, they can't see me so I don't have to worry about the police, he grumbled. Rukia's eyes widened as she and Naruto whispered, police? But they can still see me and I don't have the ability to get that far away in time, Rukia yelled, shattering her normally composed expression. Despite the window of opportunity to flee without being noticed, Naruto grinned. The short girl gave him a glare when he said, hey, I can disappear and get away no problem. Ichigo gave a headshake. Whatever. Naruto, how did you get up here in the first place anyway? The blonde just said, jumping from roof to roof. Before Naruto could respond, Ichigo mentally filed more questions and said, then you carry Rukia back to my house since I already brought her here. He then turned to face the unconscious women. What about them? Both Naruto and Rukia glanced at the sleeping pair, with the former giving the original Shinigami a questioning glance. She swiftly leapt onto Naruto's back and made him awkwardly catch her in a piggyback, saying, any damage done to them physically has been dealt with. Just let the Kikanshinki work its magic. Trust me. Now let's get going before anyone sees us. Both Ichigo and Naruto appeared uncertain until the blonde correctly positioned Rukia on his back and turned to face Ichigo. Before jumping out of one of the holes in the room and onto the closest rooftop, he said, race ya. Rukia gave a startled little yelp. Ichigo's eyes widened as he watched, then he mentally dismissed it and imitated him. Naruto, just who or what the hell are you? After the initial leap, he thought. The entire group was unaware that a black cat, who had witnessed the entire event, was perched atop a nearby wooden fence. The cat wandered off into the night after appearing to smirk. Kurosaki residence. A short while later, so? Ichigo asked, sitting on his bed with Rukia standing beside him while he was back in his recently restored body. Even though his room was still a little messy, they were able to take care of it quickly. Naruto, who was standing cross-legged on his futon against the wall, answered, so. Ichigo gave a frustrated grunt. He pointed to the window behind him and said, let's just cut the crap. How were you able to fight like that and everything else you did, like appearing out of thin air back at Orihime's and walking up the wall to go through the window when you got here? How about instead you tell me how you were separated from your body that was laying on its face like it got drunk off its ass? Naruto replied calmly. Rukia stood between them, rolling her eyes. Will you two stop acting like children and just talk like civilized adults already? Naruto crossed his arms in defiance and said, "Hey, I just feel as the one more confused here. I should get some answers first." Ichigo shot back at the blonde, saying, "More like you're the unknown factor in all of this, so you're the one that needs to start coughing up some information of your own." Rukia crossed her arms and let out a deep sigh. Obviously someone has to break the ice and it might as well be us. Ichigo gave her a look. "Weren't you the one that said this all had to be covert and handled carefully?" She turned to face Naruto and said, "Yes, but sometimes exceptions have to be made. Even if he isn't a Shinigami, he isn't anything else I would immediately deem a threat. And I assume you don't have any bad intentions, right?" Naruto gave a headshake. "Nope, I'm not a dick. And besides, in case y'all didn't know, I take my promises very seriously and I pinky promised Yuzu I wasn't some sort of bad guy." Kurama made a gagging sound in his mind before returning to resting its head on its arms, but it was eventually disregarded. Rukia gave a nod. "All right then." Rukia continued the discussion by outlining the fundamentals of the Shinigami and Ichigo's connection to the role, accompanied by illustrations with a bunny motif for visual aids. Interestingly, both teenagers experienced their first kill of a hollow creature on the same night that they were introduced to the world of hollows. Naruto also discovered that the Kikanshinki was used on the other members of the Kurosaki family, which is why the truck crashed into the house. Even though Ichigo occasionally offered a side comment, Rukia's explanation didn't come to much else. What actually happened with Orihime's family conflict and Ichigo's second fight, which helped him accept his replacement, were the only other things that were truly interesting. When they had finished summarizing the recent events, Naruto said, Wait, back up. "What, do I need to go over something with more detail?" asked Rukia. Naruto pointed to the closet containing Ichigo's clothing and other trivial items and said, "No, I pretty much got it. Evil ghost monsters, robed sword people, spirit power, blah, blah, blah and all that jazz. Did you mention something about being in this room's closet since this hollow crap started for us?" She said, "That's correct." Still trying to figure out how he missed her in the first place, Naruto nervously asked, "And how often were you in there?" Rukia hummed to herself. "I can't say for sure, but pretty often. I have to be near Ichigo as much as I can just in case I get an alert for a hollow arrival. I was still able to keep hidden when needed, though." "I see, and have you seen anything, well, private since hiding out in there? Like when we got dressed and stuff?" Since he had just learned that she was in his closet prior to the hollow-fied Sora attacking him, Ichigo's face also became a little uneasy. For a brief moment, Rukia remained silent and kept her face devoid of any visible emotions. "I will neither confirm nor deny anything," she replied. "I feel a little violated," Naruto muttered, seemingly trying to conceal his innocence with a small embrace. The fox said, "Most action you've ever gotten." Ichigo interrupted Naruto, who would have responded. "Despite that little concerning detail, aren't you freaked out about the whole spiritual aspect of this entire thing?" he inquired. Naruto gave a shrug. "I can hit them, so it's all good." Ichigo attempted to regain his seriousness as he said, Well, I believe now is the time for you to give us some answers." Naruto muttered, lost in thought, Alright, let's see. If you still want to be all secretive, you still have that stupid little memory machine in your pocket. Could have used genjutsu, but of course we both know that isn't exactly in your repertoire. Nah, it isn't a big deal to tell them about everything. Besides, you're partly to blame why I can't even use genjutsu." Naruto thought about responding. "Doesn't matter to me either way. In my view, life from here on out is our freebie, so do whatever the hell you want, but make it entertaining. Treat this world like a sandbox and either take it over, become some street urchin with no future, or whatever in between. Oh, and I'm pretty sure the power you gain from me is well worth more than that stupid shinobi art. Why make illusions when you can just blow everything up?" After receiving a slight growl in return, Naruto shot back, "Awesome advice as always, Fuzzy. Wuzzy," and decided to end the remaining exchange with the other two. He looked at the both of them with the utmost seriousness as he said, "I'm a dimension-traveling ninja, also called shinobi, that comes from a world filled with people like me that fight for their own respective villages in various countries called the Elemental Nations. My village, like I said before, is Konohagakure and one of the most powerful shinobi villages around. Our countries have a pretty big history of wars for whatever reason. I wasn't that good in history class, but we mostly just take jobs for various causes such as escorting clients, deliveries, combat, assassination, etc. I wasn't necessarily given the bloodiest kinds of missions considering I was focused on a bunch of other stuff. A lot of other stuff. And was only involved in the craziest crap when trouble happened to find me, which, quite often, happened and any poor bastards tagging along had to suffer too. One of the worst was chasing a cat called Tora. Either of you ever had to chase a demon feline that just didn't want to be caught and had a fetish for slashing the absolute shit out of your face? Never mind, that's not important. What was I talking about? He inhaled once more. Anyway, unlike most, I had a really interesting upbringing. I'll go into more detail some other time. But some certain aspects of my life required me to get prepared for a group consisting of the most dangerous shinobi in the world that were after the nine-tailed beasts, ancient masses of sentient chakra that were important for some sort of doomsday weapon that they had in mind. One of these beasts, the strongest in terms of tail count, is a giant fox that was sealed within me at birth. I'll show you the seal later. The fox can be an ass sometimes, but old, angry and fuzzy and I are a kick-ass team that helped save the world in the Fourth Great War. Like, a week ago from the tyranny of someone pretty much considered a god that appeared after the other guy that was considered a god who showed up after the first guy that was considered a god, mostly self-titled from what I understand, but he was no joke with those purple eyes of death. The first guy turned out to be alright after I gave him a little pep talk after he destroyed my village and killed nearly everyone I loved, but he ended up reviving everyone, so I guess it's cool. Still sucked, though. Back to the last god. Like person that I had to face, she's actually the reason I'm even here because of her abilities to pull dimensions out of her ass like it was nothing and had the ultimate goal of taking all the chakra and putting everyone in the world into an imaginary dream world forever. I'm not exactly sure how I turned up here, but she still ended up getting beat by myself and my dick of a friend. Not friend. Turned traitor. Asshole. Who I still want to kick the shit out of for everything he's done, including sticking a lightning covered fist through my chest a few years ago, because of a sudden boost of power from another guy considered a god, but in his case he was good to begin with even with those weird looking horns sticking out of his old head. Wonder what everyone else is doing now. Hope whatever it is, it's fun and not full of death like recently. One more breath. I can also confidently say I have the capability of using attacks that would most likely destroy this city without much trouble. Oh, and my favorite color is orange since I don't believe I've mentioned that before. Any questions? Quiet. Naruto would have heard Kurama hit its head in a mix of frustration and shock if he had been listening more intently. Worst storyteller ever. Rukia and Ichigo did not respond right away. That gradually changed to them opening and closing their mouths in an attempt to think of a response, but their tongues were unable to produce anything coherent. Finally, Rukia said, What? Naruto sighed to himself while crossing his arms. Hey, it's not like I only had to deal with a small amount of information and whatever happened in the span of a week. I was covering a hefty chunk of my life there, Datbeo. Ichigo sputtered, then turned and flopped face down on his bed. But, what, chakra? Datbeo? And ninjas? Seriously? And what about the tail? You know what? Screw this. I'm going to sleep and leaving this crap to future me. Finally, the adrenaline wore off, and a few seconds later, sleep found him easily. Rukia and Naruto watched as the teenager drifted off to sleep. Naruto said, Well, that was easy. With a severe expression in her eyes, Rukia turned to face him and arched a brow. You're not off the hook. We'll talk more tomorrow to clarify all of this, but for now it's safe to say you're not an enemy. With a slack squint, Naruto questioned, But if I was? Then you'd have a lot of powerful enemies coming after you, but like I said there's nothing extreme to worry about for now. He responded as though discussing the weather, holding his head up with the palm of his hand while resting his arm on his knee. Hey, I'm used to it. And like I said, trouble kinda finds me more often than not. It could have started to look up back at my home, but this is a new playing field and is starting to fully absorb my awesomeness. Also, since I've known each of you at least an hour you're probably both coming along for the ride. Rukia paused, then shrugged. She began to head to Ichigo's closet, a tiny enclosure filled with extra blankets and pillows, to spend the night there as well, saying, We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. That is, until she felt something speeding in the direction of her rear. She turned with ease, caught the kikanshinki with one hand, and then, almost forgetting about the gadget herself, looked at the blonde with a hint of curiosity and intrigue. He patted his belly and said, sternly, no mind rape. Ol' Furball would probably prevent it anyway. She nodded even though she wasn't sure exactly what he meant. Good night then, Rukia-chan, he said with a hint of celebration. Before the closet door completely closed, she said, Night. Naruto took a moment to reflect on his plans for the next day before deciding to fully lie down on the futon to go to sleep. He was about to commit the act when a thought suddenly occurred to him. He scoffed and turned to face the wall, frowning in frustration. I thought I explained it just fine. Lunch period, Karakura High School rooftop. Ichigo requested, So, this chakra stuff is like Riryoku. but it involves both spiritual and physical power. As he removed a sandwich from the bento Yuzu had made, still trying to figure out what the hell made the blonde shinobi tick, he and Rukia decided to start by inquiring about his own power source. In response to the typically sardonic Ichigo, Naruto cheekily said, "Pretty much. Don't know how the physical aspect changes anything, though. Maybe that makes me cooler than you Shinigami folk by default." Rukia was busy learning about the wonders of a juice box. Ichigo turned away from the insult and concentrated more on his meal. "I wouldn't know. Only been one for a week, remember?" Rukia looked intently at the juice container and said, half distracted, "Don't underestimate us Shinigami, Naruto. There are plenty of us that have amazing skills that have only been hardened and refined with each passing century. Then don't underestimate my own awesomeness, Rukia-chan. I'm considered a kid here and I already saved my world from someone stronger than some of the greatest shinobi, and that was power accumulated over a few years, not centuries that you old farts need." Naruto responded with humor. Rukia managed to give him a slight glare, but based on what he could see, it wasn't very serious. "Even though it probably wasn't the best thing to test out," she said, "then we ought to put that to the test someday." Naruto would draw unwanted attention if he was truly as strong as he claimed to be. If the Shinigami Law and Research and Development had anything to say about it, Ichigo and herself being in the area and drawing attention sooner rather than later would be problematic for everyone, primarily her and Naruto, provided they had the proper intentions, of course. Rolling the dice with the people she was involved with wasn't exactly a good idea, but any repercussions could also result in something that wasn't a huge deal overall. "I also remember you mentioning you had help with that whole world-saving thing," she went on. "Maybe, but that doesn't change that I can kick ass. I'm more interested in that you know what accumulated even means." "Hey, I can know stuff too, you ass, really?" the fox asked, clearly unsure. "Yes, really, I also might have just seen that on Ishin's word of the day calendar, but whatever, screw you." Rukia dismissed him in her mind. "Speaking of fighting, that brings forth a dilemma." "And that is?" answered Ichigo. As the blonde began to eat his own yuzu-approved meal, the girl gestured to him. "Naruto here can fight and kill hollows effectively from what we've seen and what he told us about his first encounter with one. If he kills them like he did then the spirit won't pass on into Soul Society and find peace. They'll be bound here and add an imbalance of souls being regulated by Shinigami." Naruto paused in the middle of chewing on a rice ball. With a few crumbs falling from his chin, he muttered, "While I have absolutely no idea what you mean, I'm guessing that isn't a good thing?" While it isn't the ideal outcome, it is very common with the most difficult of hollows and their devouring of souls that haven't been properly exorcised, so it isn't something to panic over. You were defending yourself and that's okay, but now we have to be prepared and make every soul count. "Prepared how?" struck back from Naruto. "If you're going to be dragged into fighting hollows, which is likely considering you'll attract them fairly easy like Ichigo, then you either have to stall until Ichigo can do a Shinigami's job or be with us in the first place to either lend aid or, once again, let Ichigo do his thing. If the setting and situation prove to be too dire and there isn't reinforcement, then go wild and take care of it if you can." The other teenager let out a sigh. He said, "Just more work," until he had an idea. "Wait, how can Naruto fight if he's visible to the living? Wouldn't that make it harder to be sneaky about all this?" "We'll always have the Kikanshinki for any such breach of secrecy, but I idly remember you saying he appeared from nothing last night," Rukia responded. Ichigo turned to Naruto and said, "Oh yeah, what was that?" Naruto gave a victorious smile. "An awesome jutsu that makes me completely transparent whenever I want. It also might have been created with less than innocent intentions originally by its creator, but it's still great for everything stealthy, even if I'm fighting with it activated," he grinned. Rukia said, "There's our answer." "Jutsu?" inquired Ichigo. Naruto let out a sigh this time. "We really need to get on the same page soon." "Hey, guys," went a voice. They all turned to watch Mizuira come toward them, carrying his lunch. Naruto waved back. "Yo." Mizuira sat down beside Naruto and said, "Oh, and Kuchiki-san is here as well. You're making friends fast, Ichigo." Ichigo remarked emotionlessly, "I'm just too lovable, I guess." Before taking a sip of water, Naruto said inanely, "Yep, a real ray of sunshine." Then came a familiar but new voice. "Can I join you guys as well? Oh, if it isn't the beautiful new transfer student, Kuchiki-san. What brings you to this place of men?" Keigo exclaimed with joy. Mizuira pointed to the two men and remarked, "She's hanging out with Naruto and Ichigo. They're apparently getting close really fast." Ichigo and Naruto looked at the boy with black hair and said, "Oh ho. Is this the beginning of a love triangle? A formidable duel of men for the heart of the newcomer? Kago exclaimed as he hurried to get to Ichigo and Naruto's eye level by sliding on his knees. He drew near as a continuous stream of tears effortlessly poured from each closed eye. He gave 2 thumbs up and muttered, "I believe in both of you, both of you." When Rukia eventually found the straw on the juice box, she became captivated and didn't notice any of this. Uncertain, Naruto said, thank you." Ichigo pushed his impulsive friend out of his personal space and said, "Just ignore him." Kago lamented, "So cold, Ichigo," but he soon recovered as he started his own lunch. The teenagers and one much older Shinigami engaged in small talk. Other than the assignments that were due and the intriguing rumors that surfaced, nothing particularly significant happened. When they all heard Orihime's voice echoing from the other side of the roof, where she was having a good time with her female friends during their break, one such intriguing incident was brought to light. They were all sitting on a big blanket that had been spread out, and their food was all around them. "But it's true," she exclaimed. Mahana asked without showing any signs of belief, "Really? A sumo wrestler blasted himself in and out of different walls in your room with a bazooka? At least think up something more realistic than that," Ryo continued. Chizuru seized the chance to put an arm around Inoue, who was pleading. "I happen to enjoy that beautiful imagination of yours, Haim. I'm telling you it did happen, Tatsuki. Chan was there too. That's what happened, right, Tatsuki, Chan?" After a moment of hesitation, the tomboy nodded and gave in. Yeah." Michiru exclaimed in amazement, "Tatsuki too? So this really happened?" The 2 Shinigami and the lone ninja exchanged knowing looks as their conversation continued to intensify. In between bites, Kago asked, "First a truck through Ichigo's place and now a sumo wrestler through Orihime's. I wonder who's next?" Mizuira questioned, "What if it's you?" Kago hummed to himself before a broad smile appeared on his face. "If my wall gets knocked down then I hope it's by a horde of women desperately looking for affections from one Asano Kago," he yelled. Ichigo said absent-mindedly, emphasis on desperately. This caused Naruto to snicker and Kago to feel down, while Mizuira patted his back without showing much empathy. There were heavy footsteps. When they focused on the source, they discovered that Chad was carrying something concealed over his shoulder. They would have greeted him as usual, but he was clearly distracted by a few things. Ichigo asked, pointing to the bandages covering his hands, face, and head, "What happened to you?" Chad began pointing to his wounds. He remarked nonchalantly, "My head was from yesterday. A steel beam fell on me." "Steel beam?" exclaimed Mizuira and Kago simultaneously. Ichigo and Naruto gazed in astonishment at the towering young man. Rukia was busy reading the nutritional information on the juice. The Latino boy went on. "The other stuff was from when I went to buy some bread. It looked like that would result in a less serious incident. And I got hit by a motorcycle." "Okay, then." Ichigo exclaimed, "What the hell have you been doing?" in shock. Chad shared the remaining details with his friends. "The guy on the motorcycle was hurt pretty bad, so I carried him to the hospital." The others thought, that's why he was late. The boy with the dark skin then extended the object behind his back and placed it on the ground. Ichigo said, "Chad?" The Latino gave a dubious grunt. "Where did you get a cockatiel?" In fact, the cage Chad brought contained a white cockatiel that was contentedly seated. Chad began, "A guy," but eventually fell silent. The others became more interesting as he allowed the sentence to linger a bit longer than seemed necessary. "Gave him to me." It was a little dull, but he thought it worked. "Don't just be lazy and cut the answer short. That's a bad habit," Asano screamed. The bird said in a high-pitched voice, "Hello, my name is Shibata Yuichi. What are your names?" With the exception of Chad, everyone stared in disbelief. Leaning close to Ichigo's ear, Naruto whispered, "Do animals talk here?" "Not the last time I checked." Kago broke the silence by saying, "Oh, that's so awesome," before bending down beside the bird. "Can you say my name?" "It's Asano." "Say it with me, Asano." Everyone gathered around to try to engage with the apparently overly intelligent animal, with the exception of Ichigo, Naruto, and Rukia. Even the girls were drawn to the commotion and came over to investigate. Out of earshot of everyone but the males with the bright hair next to her, Rukia remarked, "It's nothing harmful." The 2 gave her a questioning glance. She went on. "Something is inhabiting the bird, but it isn't evil. Looks to be nothing more than a lonely spirit. It has the potential to become a hollow, so it's best that we send it to the afterlife tonight. And I'm guessing you don't need me along to help and fight the shit out of it or something, right?" replied Naruto. Rukia gave a headshake. "No, this is a simple one. No fighting required." With a nod, Naruto gave Ichigo a shoulder pat. Looks like you're losing sleep, bud. Ichigo gave a slight grunt of annoyance. Great. Rukia said nonchalantly, don't complain about your duty. She then went back to figuring out where to poke the straw in the juice box. Very quietly and covertly, Naruto removed the objects from her hands and inserted the straw into the proper opening at the top. She made an almost imperceptible sound of amazement as he swiftly returned it, then thanked him and took a sip. So, ninja and Shinigami comparison and possessed birds aside, what class do we have next? Ichigo replied to Naruto. Math. Oh, okay. Wait, wasn't there homework? Ichigo gave a nod. Shit, mumbled Naruto. Ichigo answered, why do you even care? Naruto let out a sigh. Yuzu threatened to take meals away if I didn't try in school and your old man has me by the balls with the phone contract. Ah, did she also say she would be very disappointed in you? The blonde gave a nod. Been there, so don't screw up. It always hurts to have someone so innocent and loving stare at you with disapproval. And then they heard Rukia hum with pleasure, this juice is good. After school. Anagiya shop. Over the front door of her shop, Ikumi hung a new banner and asked, so how's school been treating you? Naruto stopped clearing the sidewalk of dirt and other small debris and stood beside the rather large step stool she was using, watching her. Before he resumed his sweeping, he remarked, it's okay I guess. I learned that this guy named Hitler was a major dick and that the Pythagorean theorem will serve me no purpose in my life. She muttered as she adjusted the newest addition to her company, sounds about right. As he saw the banner in all its splendor, Naruto questioned, why did you even get that thing anyway? With Anagiya primarily written in black in the center and slanting toward the bottom, the primary color was white. The font was functional even though it wasn't very styled. The slogan was positioned beneath her surname, and the eel logo, which was typically only displayed on her shirt, was proudly positioned symmetrically above it. Her regular contact information and hours were at the bottom. Because I need to gain some more clientele. I've had the same regulars for years that I mostly got from friends spreading the word and I'm not really getting anywhere at the speed that I want. There's always the regular bills, but I need to start doing renovations, replace all of the old equipment, and start a college fund for Kaoru-chan. And if this business grows enough at some point, I'm probably going to need better ways of advertising, hire more staff and maybe even make a website or something. Thinking big, aren't ya? She leaned away to check if the banner was balanced and said, it's better to do that than remain complacent with mediocrity or what simply isn't your best. As he leaned the big broom against the wall and completed the last of his sweeping, Naruto remarked, you should sew that on a pillow. Or on a t-shirt and sell them. By the way, I need to get you your own Anagiya shirt like an official employee. Anything you want suited to your tastes? Orange. He said plainly. Alright then. Anyway, a new order just came in earlier and can only be completed today. I don't want to lose the money, so head inside and get on it. While you're in there, can you grab me some? A loud, short metal crunch came from the step stool, interrupting her. As she marveled at her work, it snapped cleanly in half from years of rust, revealing that it was the highest step she was leaning on. All of a sudden, she began to fall back in a direction that would cause the back of her head to strike the cement. Old equipment, as she mentioned. She had just enough time to think that the landing would be painful, but all she could do was yell in surprise. Strangely, the pain never showed up. When she saw that Naruto had caught her in a bridal carry, her eyes opened to blue ones. Gosh, he's quick, she thought admiringly. He chose to quickly make fun of the situation and come up with his own amusement just as she was about to thank him. With half-lidded eyes and the tone of a corny smooth talker, he said, we both knew you would end up in my arms eventually, Ikumi-chan. That only made Ikumi think of something else, even though he was clearly kidding and sharing some of the impression Jiraiya had made on him. In response, she grabbed his cheek roughly and pulled firmly. Don't start that crap again like you did yesterday with Kaoru. This isn't some cheap, unrealistic romance scene. You're lucky I didn't throw a potted plant at the back of your head. He cried out in agony. Ow, 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 alright, quit with the pulling, and was instantly relieved when she complied. However, he wasn't finished. Damn, you'd think someone whose youth is rapidly depleting would appreciate a little attent. Fucking ow. She regained her hold with greater vigor. With a sharp tone, she demanded, what was that? I mean, anyway would be honored to be with such a young and lovely woman such as yourself. Gah. You're an angel sent from the heavens down to grace us with your presence. Now would you let go, you crazy? Ow. Okay. No one is worthy of your beauty and we men are just dirt on the bottom of your boot. We should all worship the ground you walk and be glad for whatever attention is given to us. Come on, Your nail is digging into the skin. She made sure he understood by keeping her hard gaze on his own flinching eyes before releasing them once more. With a smug smile, she said, now that that's done, thank you for catching me. Now be a good golden goose and get started on that job. She had called him that yesterday, but neither she nor he were particularly concerned about the position they were still in. In an attempt to soothe his wounded cheek after disappointing her, he answered, yeah, love you too. They both heard a low squelch close by, so they had to postpone that for a little while. They both turned to look at Kaoru, who was standing with his mouth hanging open, his eyes stunned, and his ice cream cone splattered on the harsh floor beside him. He had just returned from spending time at the neighborhood park with some of his school friends and was enjoying what had been an amazing day thus far. Like kids, they engaged in games, laughing heartily and putting aside any minor issues that were bothering them. Nothing else mattered in their youthful freedom. Homework was irrelevant, there was no point in chores. It made no difference to remain silent. Furthermore, it didn't matter if any bothersome men were pursuing his mother. Naturally, when he turned the corner to the front of his house after deciding to pick up a treat on his way home, everything fell apart. His mother was being held tightly in the arms of her new employee there, as obvious as day. Again, what was his name? That didn't matter, whatever. The fact that his filthy hands were on his mother's body was what mattered. Not only that, but she didn't seem to mind at all. He claimed to have seen her smile when he first saw them staring at one another, but he was obviously only paying attention to his mother's purportedly happy expression and missed Naruto's agitated one. Subsequently, he saw that the man's cheek was red, a shade redder than the rest of his face, which was glowing with a hysterical emotion. But when the only words he heard caught up to him, his mind instantly went to a positive guess as to what that emotion was. I love you too, don't you? Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. In his troubled mind, a number of connections began to appear at random. Red face with a darker patch on the cheek. He may have been reacting to multiple kisses on that whiskered cheek. 2. He said. She simply admitted it, and the emotions were restored. That's how she was held. Perhaps they were in a honeymoon mood and prepared to do something crazy, like run away. On the other hand, all they could see of Naruto and Ikumi was the young boy pointing shakily at them with his finger, which they assumed was accompanied by a nearly audible silent scream from his still, open maw. A few more seconds passed before Kaoru's brain could take any more of this silent stare-down of perplexity on both ends. As a result, he quickly passed out and fell backward, his backpack practically cushioning his entire fall with a brief, quiet thud. Kaoru! Ikumi screamed in terror as she swiftly escaped Naruto's hold and ran to her fallen son, devoting all of her attention to him. With a blank expression, Naruto watched her give him a gentle shake while frantically inspecting every opening in his body, but it didn't take him long to respond. He laughed and said, hey. He decided to finally look into the job Ikumi was referring to, reasoning that he might as well leave the mother-son pair that somewhat reminded him of Tsunami and Inari to their own devices, with the exception that one had a strong personality to match a motherly persona while the other would probably remain an annoyance in the future. He went into the house, business and proceeded to the counter where the worn cardboard box containing all of their job orders was kept. He thought the new request was sitting next to the box. He was correct when he read the date and a brief description of a minor cleaning task, but he immediately stopped when he saw the caller's name. Kazuki Urahara.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.